Welcome, everyone. About to get started. Vice Chair, can I call on you for an invocation?
Let us pray. God of Abraham, we thank you for this time together late in the afternoon on important business here in the Judiciary Committee. We pray for wisdom, justice, and moderation, and in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I plan to go down the list here. I'm adding one bill, House Bill 840, and we'll hear that in a moment. The problem I have tonight is that two of the bills Representative Hilton is on, and he is in before another committee right now. He will try to make his way when we get to those bills. And also in House Bill 1371, Representative Burchett is also before another committee. So as soon as I can get them freed up, we're going to get into that. But I do have Jordan Ridley here, so I'll call you up for House Bill 931. And you have a simple bill, is that right?
I hope it's simple. But yes, House Bill 931, LC number 472595. It came at the request of some of the judges in my county. It says that the point of the bill is any judge's personally identifiable information, which is their home phone number, personal cell phone number, and home address, would not be posted on the state ethics website. They still have to file with the Ethics Commission. It's just not posted online. The U.S. Marshals have figures that came out this month that said attacks on judges have gone up 300% over the last 2 years. Well, threats on judges have gone up 300%, and physical attacks has gone up by double digits as well. So, judges are supposed to remain impartial, be unbiased. Every day we show up, we make a vote that represents the public, but a judge, they're only supposed to be making decisions in that courtroom, and they're supposed to make an unbiased decision. So when people are getting their addresses showing up, attacking them, it's hard for them to, we want to make sure they have every protection possible and do their job.
All right. Chairman Smith.
Appropriate time, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion.
All right. Any questions of the author by the committee? Seeing none, you can make that motion now.
Mr. Chairman, move do pass.
All right. Is there a second? All right. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, your bill's going through the rules. All right. House Bill 840. And we'll need to pause just a minute to get the the sub to the committee members. We'll stand at ease for a few minutes.
What's that? He did. He endorsed it.
All right, Representative Fleming, this is House Bill 840, LC 481085S. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
All right, if you would tell us about your
All
bill.
right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate letting me present House Bill 840 to y'all today. This is a piece of legislation that I worked on with Flor Lear McDonald starting last year, and went through a revision with the sub that you have in front of you. And simply what it does is it protects children from sexually explicit performances or lewd performances that might be held at venues across the state. What it does is basically says you have to be 18 years of age to attend these performances. You cannot be admitted with a parent if you're under 18. It lays out some fines for the venues if they violate this. As you can see on line 44 going through line 4950, it gives the Department of Revenue where they may issue a fine for the first offense of $50,000, a second offense of $100,000. Also, the Department of Revenue, if given full power and authority to suspend or revoke the license of any establishment holding a license for the sale of alcohol. And you can see as going down to line 54, some of the defenses it might have, that if the person accused had reasonable cause to believe the minor involved was 18 years or older, but also such minor, if they were to have presented a fake driver's license or fake identification card, that could be a defense. This is basically to tighten up some of the venues that have these performances and shows. We're not saying that they can't have these performances. We're just saying that nobody under 18 should be allowed to attend these performances if it is anything involving this sexual nature.
Okay, I'm surprised that there was nothing already in code about this. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
All right. Any questions by the committee? I got some over here. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. I'm a little worried about I support the aim.
Yes, ma'am.
I certainly don't want our children to be exposed to things, but when you talk about sexually provocative dances or gestures that depict any sexually explicit nudity, that's easy, but sexual conduct. I've got a almost 12-year-old, and I can think of certain dances that people do at weddings. I can think of dances that appear on videos. I mean, are we inadvertently sweeping up too much conduct in this bill? That's my concern. And how do we? I think we are. Tell me how I'm wrong.
Yes,
and how do we prevent it?
And I think this also, a lot of these, what did you say, performance and shows, they're advertised. They're advertised that there will be certain shows, performances, and things like that. And yes, you're right. I have 3 kids too, 14, 12, and 9, and so I'm very concerned about that as well. But no, this is anything that is going to be sexually explicit in that nature, and if it's a planned show at whether it's a club or a bar or any venue, a community center that might be rented or something like that.
Would belly dancing fall into the definition at line 23 to 24?
I would not think so.
How can you distinguish the language in 23 to 24 and belly dancing?
Well, I think it goes back to the prior lines. If it's sexually explicit, I mean, yes, I guess you could construe belly dancing could be sexually explicit or not, but I think there's a lot of these shows that get to where they get to the point of crossing that line.
But that's my concern. Where is the line? If we pass a bill, it has to pass constitutional muster, and if you can't explain what is and isn't sexually explicit, that's going to be a problem. So I've asked the example of belly dancing. I think I could also ask, do you think that, to use a technical term, twerking would qualify as sexually provocative dancing in lines 23 to 24?
I think it would. I think it could be.
And so are we going to criminalize or make illegal someone taking their children to, almost any wedding? Right. I keep using weddings because I don't go to bars anymore, but I go to weddings and people have a good time on the dance floor, right. And they're not trying to expose children to sexually provocative dances. But I think this is so vague that we would be making all of that illegal conduct if we were to pass this bill.
This is aimed at venues that people go to rent, and whether it's entertainment groups come in and rent these facilities, and they know the type of shows they're going to have. They know they're going to have specific shows that could be sexually explicit in nature. It is up to that venue to talk to whoever is renting their their venue that day or promoter to talk to them. They've got to figure out what that type of show is, and then figure out, hey, this could be a show where we need to, or whatever performance you might have, that it needs to be 18 or up. So it's up to that venue to, to work with those people to decide what they're going to be doing with that performance or show.
Well, we got this just as we came in here, so I admit I haven't had a chance to read
Sure.
it
Yes,
in depth as I normally would like to, but could you point me to where this is about venues? I think you were trying to say maybe this is venues for money. Could you point me to that language?
Let me see. Well, and it starts in 41 talking about the different establishments. So, I would take that as the establishment being whether it's a bar or a nightclub or whatever venue that may be. And if the venues have alcohol licenses.
I'll look closer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Bruce.
While I understand the intent, based on what I just heard my colleagues say, and based on what I'm looking at in this short period of time we had to look at it, Elvis Presley's performance, they couldn't have gone to it. Mm-hmm. The Super Bowl that just took place, we would have had to turn the TV off so that they could not see the halftime at Super Bowl, based on the language in this bill. I don't know if that was your intent, but that's what is here. Everybody came and talked about how great Atlanta was represented in the Super Bowl, but based on this law, based on this bill, that would have been outlawed if this bill would have passed. We wouldn't have been able to let the kids watch halftime.
And I will point out, sexually explicit conduct is already defined in the code under 1612-100, and that's what we are referencing here in this bill. So that sexually explicit conduct is already defined in our code what that is.
The gestures is what we're talking about. That's not defined anywhere, to my knowledge.
Right.
All right, who's Chairman Smith? Is that you? 14?
14.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative. And I just wanted to clarify, in your bill, you had specifically referred to different code sections in order to define these terms like sexual conduct, sexually explicit conduct. I don't want to read out the entire definition, but going to those sections, it's very specific in that we're talking about actual or simulated sex acts, sexual acts.
That's
we're
correct.
not talking about dancing, or we're talking about sexual acts. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Reed.
Representative Fleming, have other states enacted similar laws?
There have, yes,
Okay,
sir.
Florida.
Yeah, yes,
and,
sir.
And,
yeah. I don't know all the states, but I know Florida's one of them, and I know there's several other states with it.
Subsection F looks like it addresses commercial facilities, hotels, food service, alcohol licensees, things like that. So it looks like F does have, commercial establishments. What about parks and other public facilities in addition to commercial facilities?
Right. It was my understanding that would cover those as well.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Fleming, wouldn't you agree that on line 23, where we talk about sexually provocative dances or gestures that are performed, that is a gray area. I agree. That's a gray area. But the qualifier takes place on line 23 and the beginning of 24, where it says that depict any sexually explicit nudity. And so it's not just a sexually provocative dance. It's a sexually provocative dance that also entails sexually explicit nudity. Would you
That'd be
agree with
correct.
me there? Thank you.
Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just because none of us have had a chance to review this, we literally got this as we were sitting here, not even as we came in, and it's a substitute that I don't think anybody had seen, at least not members. And I appreciate Representative Kelly's comments, but it's not just on line 23, sexually provocative dances or gestures performed that depict any sexual explicit nudity or sexual conduct. So we're not just talking about nudity, are we?
Representative Kelly.
It does refer to sexual conduct, but that refers to a definition that exists in Georgia law already for how sexual conduct is defined. I don't think it's just broad discretion as to what a judge means. A judge interprets sexual conduct to mean. I think in section 1612-102 we really define what that is. And we could, it's a long definition for both in section 1612-102 and 1612-100, where we have both those code sections referenced. They're both pretty long definitions and detailed out definitions. Maybe we can pull them all up on the phone, or I could not necessarily what I thought I'd be doing today is reading through this, but I will, because I think it's an important conversation to know what we're talking about here and what we're trying to prevent our children from being exposed to. So sexually explicit conduct, or sexual conduct in 1612-102 says sexual conduct means actual or simulated acts of masturbation, homosexuality, sexual intercourse, or physical contact in an act of apparent sexual stimulation or gratification with a person's clothed or unclothed genitals, pubic area, buttocks, or such person as female breast. That is what we're talking about in lines 23 and 24. Where we reference sexually explicit conduct, we reference 1612-100, and that's a longer definition, but it includes, it says sexually explicit conduct means actual or simulated sexual intercourse, including genital to genital, oral to genital, anal to genital, or oral anal, whether between persons of the same or opposite sex, bestiality, masturbation, lewd exhibition of the genitals or pubic area of any person, flagellation or torture by or upon a person who is nude, condition of being fettered, bound, or otherwise physically restrained on the part of a person who is nude, physical contact in an act of apparent sexual simulation or gratification with any person's unclothed genitals, pubic area, or buttocks, or with the female's nude breast. And finally, who would ever thought we would have to talk about this? Defecation or urination for the purpose of sexual stimulation of the viewer. That's what we're talking about protecting children under 18 from. Is that the intent of the bill? That is the intent of the bill, yes, sir. I know we're getting this late, and I know we're having to do what Judiciary does, which is kind of go through some really in-depth and hard conversation to have. I would have preferred not to have read that, or even have to deal with this. I would have hoped that this wasn't even going on in our state, but I would hope this committee would see the wisdom in it, just like we did earlier this week with trying to prohibit minors from having access to some very illicit websites.
And Representative Kelly, since that was directed, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman.
You may.
I don't want our children exposed to these things, but my concern as a member of the Judiciary Committee is that we pass a law that can actually be enforced. And if it said restricted sexual conduct means, and we referred to those definitions, I think that would be one thing. But what we've done in line 23 is say sexually provocative dances or gestures that depict these things. It doesn't have to be nudity. It doesn't have to be all those things that you read. Depict. What does that mean? I think I think that this could be written in a way that gets to the aim of the author. And I'm not trying to, I don't want our minors exposed to these things either, but I think line 23 and 24 is just a problem the way it's written.
And I always appreciate your viewpoint and your I like sitting next to you on the floor because you give me a lot of insight, and so I want to heed to it here too. But do you see lines 23 and 24 as I see it as a there are two opportunities there. I see line 23 and 24. You could almost, I think you could break off the second part of 24 and make it a C if we wanted to, because I see B where we talk about, I see there's one act, sexually provocative dances or gestures performed that depict any sexually explicit nudity. I see that as one thing. And then I see or, just a separate, or sexual conduct as terms are defined in Code Section 1612-102. So in my view, and this is, again, trying to work with us here, is that in sexual conduct, is defined. We have that defined in Georgia law. We have case law that would, is reasonable as the judge has already interpreted it. So sexual conduct, something a little more broad, is defined in code. But then for something like that is, I think, harder to define, something like sexually provocative dances or gestures, that it can be very hard to define, because I do think you get into the question of belly dancing. Maybe you get into the question of twerking. But I think since those are a little broader, maybe not as narrowly tailored, I think it's important that we do have a qualifier there, and that is, gestures performed that depict any sexually explicit nudity. And for me, that's the qualifier. I don't think that's what makes me feel better about that. But I'm open to having a conversation with you about that. But that's just that's the way my mind's reading it over here.
And we're all trying to do this after we're tired. It may, one idea is just to take away the references to dances or gestures. I mean, I think it's the conduct that we don't want our young people exposed to, not a dance that might suggest or depict these things, even though they're not actually happening and we're not actually showing nudity. That's my concern. But I can work on some language, or you can, and we can see if we can come up with something.
Okay. Thank you.
Vice Chair Reeves.
On line 23, if we strike dances or gestures performed and just put in conduct, sexually provocative conduct that depicts, that would be one idea for an amendment. Strike dances or gestures performed and put the word conduct in its place, and then add an S to depict, so depicts. So it would read sexually provocative conduct that depicts either sexually explicit nudity or sexual conduct as defined by that statute that Representative Kelly read, that has S&M and a bunch of other things that clearly are harmful to minors.
Why not just refer to those definitions, period, as opposed to...
It does. Yeah.
Right, but without the dances or conduct that depict these things, what about just those things? So that we're not trying to figure out what is a depiction, what isn't, if it's the act that we're concerned about.
Because I think it's important for the actual performance part of the simulation. I mean, I think that's important, and I would probably have a little bit of a disagreement with our vice chair. I don't like disagreeing with either you or him, because you are both, I think, smarter lawyers than me. But I think it's important that we've captured that we're only talking about the dances or the gestures when there's nudity. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about someone twerking. We're saying twerking plus nudity. That's what those lines. That's what 23 does. We're talking about gestures with nudity. I mean, we could, if we wanted to clear it up, I think we could strike that depict any, and we could just replace those three words and replace those with. So it says sexually provocative dancers or gestures performed with sexually explicit nudity. If that provides some clarity, I would be glad to first make a motion to pass, and second start getting into amendments and discussions. But I don't know if that's the proper time. But that I think is the way I've always interpreted it. But if there's a concern with the words that depict any, I think we could just replace it with sexually explicit nudity. Better?
I'm good with that.
Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think 15's broken.
This is 14.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Go
We're having
ahead.
share back and forth. My question is this, and I know this is creating a new statute, but I'm still curious as to what the case law says as far as sexually explicit behaviors and activities. As far as what does the case law say about belly dancing being illegal? The only time I've seen belly dancing was probably in The Man with the Golden Gun, Roger Moore. As James Bonifat tells you where I come from in the state. But
A sheltered life.
I would say I would say this. I would say that I'd be interested in see what the case law says about this, and is it wise for us to try to codify and capture everything in statute when we have a common law system that, although we are changing the statute, have other cases? Are there any on point that explicitly say this belly dancing or twerking is not considered sexually explicit conduct? I don't know of any recently, but I could be wrong.
Okay. All right. Any last word?
No, sir. Appreciate y'all hearing it.
All right. I don't see any more questions. What's the will of the committee? I have a motion. You got a second? Any discussion?
I'll offer an amendment, Mr. Chairman.
All right, go ahead.
On lines 23, I would strike that depict any, and I would replace it with.
The word with.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any discussion?
That's my motion. I don't know if I have a second yet.
Okay. All right. Now we have a second. So any discussion on the amendment? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now, any other amendments? All right. That brings us to the main question. All those in favor of this bill as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Your bill
Thank y'all.
passes.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see who I got
I'm
here.
glad I didn't read that definition for nothing, Mr. Chairman.
You saved me a job.
You never were a prosecutor, right? Yeah. We talk like that all the time. All right. Let's see. Do I see Representative Hilton here? Nor Burchett.
Burchett, he said he's pretty tied up. He said he asked me to just text him. Getting towards the end. He'd like to go last, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I know he would, but
Text him.
yeah, you want to do that? All right. Recognize Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a workplace bill sponsored by Terry and Elowitz, Representative Terry and Elowitz, that we heard in subcommittee. And I met with her as well as people from the business community who she and they had worked a lot on that bill, and no common ground was in sight. I talked to Chairman Gunter, talked to several other folks in House leadership. I was reminded of the committee meeting we had in Banks County this year that was very productive on that judicial circuit, and have asked permission from the chair to do 2 Judiciary committee meetings, one in November, one in December, on that bill to gather more information, particularly from law schools, from human resources departments, from court decisions, from some things kind of outside of the parties who had been working on the bill so far, particularly with legislation in Florida and Texas, who Georgia competes with on jobs in that area. I've talked to Representative Edna Jackson. Savannah State is coming to the Capitol tomorrow, and we're going to ask them whether they would be interested in hosting that meeting in Savannah on November 23rd, which is UGA's playing UMass that day. So if anybody's already got tickets to that game, sorry about that, but I thought that might be a safe date in November to have a meeting out of town. And then we would I'll work with the chairman to find a date in December and circulate that, see if that's a good one. So that workplace law bill committee meeting, and also the coastal marshlands bill, Representative Al Williams had a good idea to add some Geechee quiet title issues on there. We have a draft of that I'll circulate to the committee, but that bill, I think, could stand to have some more work and public input, and we'll have a brief hearing at those 2 meetings in November and December on that bill. But it is still here before the committee, so just want to make that announcement to let people put that on the calendar.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to stand at ease. I understand Representative Hilton's about 5 minutes out. So. All right, folks, we're back at it. Representative Hilton, whichever one you want to start with. I'll give you the choice.
Let's do the fun one first. Let's do House Bill 1075.
All right.
House Bill I'll be reading from, we do have a substitute. I'm reading from LC 520459S.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say the cliche, it's a simple bill in which notary acts are, agencies will recognize notarial acts done in other states, whether in person or electronically. I really want to kind of cut to the chase, which is lines 34 to 36, which is where a lot of consternation comes about anytime we talk about notary acts done. And I know this body has debated this subject ad nauseum. Those lines in particular say that nothing in this shall convey to real property. I know that's a concern of some of our friends in the real estate closing business, including my wife who's an attorney. So with that, I may pause for questions and take this from the committee.
Any questions from the committee? I don't have any. I do have some people that want to speak to the bill, though. John Clayton. Yes, sir. Well, okay.
Always like coming after a sexually explicit dancing
Yeah.
bill, so
That's what you get in judiciary.
well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm John Clayton. I'm here on behalf of my client Notarize. We provide notary services in all 50 states. We're here to support HB 1075 by substitute. Currently, we notarize documents in other states, and we have no idea where they're going to be used. A notary's job is to verify and attest to a signed document. These notaries follow the law of the state they are in without knowledge of where the other party is taking the document. This bill simply allows only state agencies, this is only state agencies in Georgia, and what I can do while I've got this, I'll just pass these around. I've got a list of the state agencies that actually accept notarization. And Representative Jones, if I could just pass those here. As I was saying, these notaries follow the laws of their state they are in without knowledge of where the other party's taking the document. This bill simply allows only state agencies, so only the agencies that you'll see in that document right there, to respect the documents that are notarized in other states per their form state's rules. I would also like to speak to the real estate exemption. Outside this capital, I practice as a transactional lawyer. I've done hundreds of residential real estate closings. I absolutely respect the fact or the need for the industry to have in-person notarization for these very personal and financial transactions. This bill codifies this real estate exemption in the law and will ensure that all future Georgia real estate closings, regardless of the state they are closed in, will have in-person notary. I think that's very important. This bill also gives clarity to only our state agencies, not clerk's offices, not probate courts, not anyone else, only state agencies. That's all this bill covers. That while Georgia requires documents to be notarized in person, we'll respect the fact that 44 other states have a different process. I thank you and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Vice Chair.
So subsection E was added after the bill was drafted, and it says nothing in this code section shall apply to any security instrument or document executed solely for the conveyance of real property located in the state, whether or not such security interest or document is recorded.
Yes, sir. That is what I'm referring to as a real estate exemption.
Thanks.
Yes, sir. Sure. Can I give you a couple examples of why this is necessary? I mean, I think that's very important. One that I think is really important is I use the Carvana example. You know, right now where people are buying cars outside the state, cars are brought back into state, DMVS, and this is where we've had problems. DMVS, there's something called a limited power of attorney for motor vehicle transfer. All those require notarizations. Typically, these cars are bought in other states and have to be notarized per their state's rules and are brought back into Georgia. Kind of another practical matter is professional licenses. You know, you're in Missouri, you get a professional license, you get it notarized there. You bring it to Georgia, we have to respect that. Well, you know, they may be notarized by their rules, but it may not be by ours. So those technical degrees, if you can see that list, I mean, anything that those departments take notarization for, it's a fairly robust list as well. So then the bill, as it once again only relates to state agencies, no one else.
All right. I don't see any questions. Let's see, who's next? Meredith Shearer, Hildreth?
Yep, here.
Come on up. Your name's long. I thought it was two names there.
You get married. Chairman, committee members, thank you. I am Meredith Shearer Hildreth. I'm a closing attorney. I run a medium-sized firm, and I'm also the current president of GRECA, which is the Georgia Real Estate Closing Attorneys Association. We are very strongly opposed to this bill. We have been watching the development of the laws around electronic signing, notary, and closings for several years. Georgia, as you know, is an attorney state as it relates to real estate closings, and as such, we oversee all aspects of the transfer of property and the recording of deeds, the entire process. This particular bill allows remote online notary from any state to be accepted in Georgia. And even though it has a carve-out for real estate transactions, we oppose this for several reasons. One is that there is no need for accepting RON, remote online notary, from other states when we have a bill that's currently, it's Senate Bill 425, which is specifically addressing e-notary in Georgia with a lot of protections around that. Secondly, the carve-out for real estate is very easy to be struck at the last minute or in the next session or in the next year. Thirdly, that there is no practical way to enforce the carve-out, as the clerk of courts is not going to take on the duty of sorting out, which electronic notary is from Georgia and which is from the least restrictive state that has e-notarization. There's also no penalties for violating the real estate carve-out, and also that leads to the unauthorized practice of law in our state. And there's no accountability to Georgia citizens, and out-of-state notaries will likely not respect the rules of the Georgia Supreme Court surrounding closings, the notarization of deeds, and things like that. We really feel like this other bill that's pending, the Senate Bill 425 in its substitute form, allows our industry, and that bill's not just for real estate closings, to embrace electronic closings, kind of move us forward along with those other states that are doing electronic closings, but does so in a very protective and safe way to prevent fraud, the way that Georgia wants it structured and not the way that maybe Virginia does it, which is very, very unrestrictive in our opinion.
Okay, hang on just a second. Chairman Smith?
Yes. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come and be with us. I'm a little interested that you'd be speaking against this, since we exempted y'all from this. And I understand your point. I mean, look, I worry about when I send things over to the other side as much as anybody in this house. But unfortunately, that's politics. And so I understand your concerns with that section being removed, but you're passionate about this, very knowledgeable, and I think that case needs to be made to the state Senate to make sure they keep this provision in here. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think keeping that provision in here is very important, but I think when you look at the Senate Bill 425 in its substitute form, which is really addressing e-notarization in e-signing, that whole process, again, not just for real estate, but for all industries in our state. We have a bill that is created by Georgians, looking out for Georgians, and it's not just saying, well, we're gonna be okay with what goes on in all these other states, and we don't really know all the fraud prevention and all the protections that are built into all those other states' laws as far as e-notarization. And while deeds, of course, are my primary concern because I'm in the real estate business, if I had to do with the car transfers, I wouldn't just say it's not important. It is important. Fraud is just unbelievably rampant. And this is really opening a door that I don't know that we want to open. When we have something else, you know what I mean? We are addressing these things. It is kind of coming through the system. It's not, this isn't the only bill that's looking at it. And I don't feel like this one has any of the protections that the other bill has.
So it sounds as if that Senate bill, which, you know, we haven't seen that here in the House yet, but it would sound like that would put some guardrails on that you would like, correct?
We are very much in support of that, yes.
And so we're not really clear as to if that would contradict anything in this legislation, would it?
Does it contradict? Yes, because it doesn't recognize the notarizations of all of the other states. It sets parameters for those notarizations to happen in Georgia.
But yet again, as far as transferring of real property here, this exempts the real estate area.
As long as it is in there, but then again, there's also no penalties built in. I just don't feel like it's strong enough, and that it's gonna, I don't think it's going to end up protecting what it wants to protect.
And although I disagree with you, what I would say is I appreciate your passion for the issue and would highly recommend that when this goes over, if it passes here, that you share those concerns with the Senate so they keep that provision in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Vice Chair Reeves.
Senate Bill 425 hasn't passed the Senate, right?
It just went through the same process as here. It passed the Judiciary.
Okay.
Yep.
And then closing attorneys like remote in-person notary, which was done during COVID, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the DocuSign or remote online notary that you're suspicious about.
From the other states, right? There's all sorts of protections built into this other bill as far as having to keep records for 6 years and identification and, you know, a lot of protections that we know because that will be Georgia law. We don't know what the law is of all these other states.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else?
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Mark, is it Sieb or Sieb?
Sieb.
Sieb.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm going to probably just repeat some of what Meredith shared with you. My name is Mark Sieb. I'm a principal and managing attorney with the law firm Gannick PC. We're a residential and commercial real estate boutique. I'm also the immediate past president of GRECA, the Closing Attorneys Association. On my first reading of House Bill 1075, the first thing I thought to myself was this is a big shortcut. The bill that Maris just mentioned from the Senate side, 425, represents several years worth of work by legislators, legislative advisors, members of the real estate community, other members of the bar. Very well thought out bill. And seems to me that the current bill, before the House, just isn't really manageable. I'll just read one section to you, lines 19, 20, and 21. When a document is notarized by a notarial officer of another state, each agency shall accept such document, provided that the manner of notarization is authorized by such state. I wonder how, like an entry-level clerical person would know whether or not the act has been authorized by the other state. When you have another bill before the Senate that's taken a lot more time thinking all these issues through and tailoring it to Georgia law, existing Georgia law, also taking into account advisory opinions from the Supreme Court. It just seems like there's been a lot more thought provided in that bill. And we don't really want to have the lowest common denominator state controlling how we do things in Georgia.
All right, thank you. I see no questions.
All right, thank you.
Any last word on this? I'm sorry.
Thank you. And just for a little bit of clarification, I feel like there's been some confusion on this issue. 425, which they're speaking about, It regulates how we do notaries inside the state of Georgia. Absolutely, completely different bill. This is about how notarization is done outside the state by the foreign states' rules and are accepted by our state agencies. I find it really ironic that the Georgia Closers Association has come up to oppose this bill when they're specifically exempted. This bill has nothing to do with real estate transactions. Absolutely zero.
Okay. Thank you. All right.
That's everything.
Chairman Smith.
Mr. Chairman, appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
All right. I don't see any other questions for the author or the witnesses. Anything you would like to add?
I'll just reiterate. I've got a good friend and constituent who's a real estate client. I specifically told these, I want to exempt real estate. And while my friends in the Senate, they've got good policy over there, I think we get it right here with a very different bill, but a good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead.
Move to pass.
All right. Is there a second? Second. All right. Have a motion and a second. Any amendments or discussion about the bill? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. The
Thank you, Mr.
bill's
Chairman.
going to rules. And that brings us to 1296.
I saw the whip walk in, and I will defer to him if he's still here. Oh, okay. Very different bill. So is that? No, many of you in this room are parents of children, some younger, some older. Mine are all under the age of 17. And we've all seen and heard the impacts of social media. I mean, heck, it's a lot of what we're dealing with here in terms of the mental health crisis. And so that's what this bill seeks to address. There's a version of it on the Senate side, almost exactly the same, that's making its way through. I expect, in fact, it was voted on, I believe, yesterday and passed 51-1. I don't know who the one no vote was, but I can guess. But 1296 seeks to add parental verification for potential users of social media under the age of 16. We modeled this legislation after what passed in Louisiana. We did that intentionally. There's been bills similar to this that have passed in other states and have been challenged and in some cases struck down. We believe this one combines the best of those and believe Louisiana's version is the one that's going to hold up. Really, the meat of the bill speaks to how parents can verify the age of their child there. And I'm just going to scoot down to where that section is. Yeah, it's down in lines, kind of 115 starting there, the different ways. We provide for a number of ways for parents to verify the age of the minor account holder. And then we provide toward the end there some abilities for the social media company to supervise. Do they have minors who have illegally signed up without permission? How is that handled? And ultimately, all of this falls under the responsibility of the Attorney General to police. But again, I want to applaud this committee and our body for the work we've done on social media. And there's a number of stats you can see out there. The more time kids spend on it, the more depression and other things start to set in. And so we just want to encourage families to get involved in what their children are seeing and viewing online. And this bill is supported by a number of social media companies, and I'll yield for questions.
Has the Attorney General, have you contacted him about being included in this bill?
I have not heard yay or nay either way, whether they're for or against. Happy to reach out following this meeting.
Okay. All right. I don't see any questions from the committee. All right. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Procedurally, just help me understand how this is working in other states. If a minor already has a account that exists today, what happens once we pass this law?
My guess is that they're, and again, I'll rely on experts who may be behind me here, but I'm guessing that they're probably grandfathered in. I wouldn't imagine we would be kicking them out and requiring parents to re-sign back up.
That's what I was trying to figure out, whether everybody was going to have to do that, or how we were figuring that out. Thank
There's
you.
a lot of influencers out there, myself included, that would be harmed by that. So
I know you're.
the gentleman knows what he speaks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see a recording. Y'all come to 504. I get to see
I
you
gotta
in
get
action over there.
I got to get to filming later on.
Yeah.
All right. Who's got number 4 over there? Representative Holcomb.
I don't know what an influencer is, but I'm not sure that you're one of them. But with that, sorry.
My tens of followers would say otherwise. Yeah.
Give me a sense of line 107 of what would be commercially reasonable efforts. Like, I want to operationalize this and have an understanding of what we're doing.
It's interesting right now. I learned, I didn't know about this, that say a minor right now does sign up. Facebook has ways of policing. So say a minor signs up. He says he's a 25-year-old male and from Kansas, and his friends then, it turns his birthday, and they're all jumping out on his feed saying, hey, happy 13th birthday. They have algorithms to catch that. And so they already have sort of these tools in place to catch these minor accounts, and then they'd be able to kind of compare, okay, that kid's getting wished a happy 11th birthday. Do we have an age verification in place?
Okay. So does this effectively mean that everybody will have to be age verified then? To include
Only those under the age of 16.
Okay.
So my grandmother, my mother, you and I, we would not need to be age verified.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure that I understand how that plays out in practice, but I think what you're trying to do makes sense. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Hong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at specifically line 134, 135, and I don't have children, so I've never signed any minors up for any type of social media. But is it like, are you kind of looking at maybe like, I don't know, Netflix when you sign up and you have like a minor account and it's connected to the adult account? Do you know if that's how it's structured right now, or is this kind of hoping that it will be structured that way?
So my wife and I are very involved and engaged in what our kids have, and so my daughter signed up for what's called Facebook Messenger for kids, and so it's a kids version that essentially speaks to 134 and 135. There's certain restrictions that we as the parent can place around who messages her, what ages of those folks are, and really we just limit it. We sort of limit it just to family. So there's existing products out there that speaks to this and accomplishes what this is trying to do.
That is still doing this currently. Mm-hmm. Not all social media platforms do, though?
I can't speak for all. I'm just speaking from experience. Yeah.
And do you get to pick and choose certain adults? Like, what if I want to message my goddaughter? Like, is that something that exists or what you're intending?
Yes. So my daughter's grandmother, my mother, messages my daughter all the time on Facebook Messenger for kids. So yeah, we allow that to take place. Yeah.
Okay. Representative Jones.
Thank you, Representative Hilton.
Yes, sir.
There's just a couple things that I'm trying to. I love the intent of the bill. I really, really do. But for someone who lives in this world 24/7, you know,
I will defer to my technology guru.
Yeah,
here,
I see ghost apps that kids use that literally hide real apps behind the ghost apps, and the parents are looking at the phone going, "Oh, little Bobby's using fill in the blank," when little Bobby's not using fill in the blank. So just a couple things. Are we authorizing in 107 to Representative Holcomb's question? Are we effectively saying to Meta, Google, the crew, effectively the use of machine language and AI to scrape the internet to get a better understanding of what Sally and Bobby's real age is? Because effectively, by scraping the net, obviously we're able to get a little bit of a better indication of what their age may or may not be. But I'm asking the question.
Yeah, I mean, based on the answer I shared before, I think they're effectively using AI to do that right now. That example of, when Bobby gets wished happy 11th birthday from all his friends, but he's signed up to be as a 25-year-old. Facebook and other programs are using that algorithm to actively gather that information, and that's how they police it.
Okay, one more question, then I'll let the lawyers do their thing. When
Please
you go,
don't let the lawyers
When
do
you
their
go to the penalty section, and my only concern is, given the availability of free and simple VPNs that exist within the net right now, and most of these young men and women have the ability to use them pretty, I'll say, adequately, to be able to ping off of Birmingham or ping off of Denver, or for that matter, ping off of London if they'd like. Is something like that, when they're using commercially reasonable efforts, but yet they were, subterfuged by the fact that someone VPN'd out of Denver, is that something that they're not going to get caught in some type of unintended consequence?
Yeah, and I'm just reading through. I mean, I think there's sort of a good faith argument here that you can make that, the social media company can say, listen, we've employed these practices. You're right, to your point. Nowadays, anybody could be anywhere, But I think as long as the social media company is able to demonstrate we've employed tools in accordance with this law, I would think that would absolve them.
Okay. If I could just ask, Chairman Gunter, I know we have other people to talk. I don't want to take too much time, but maybe if we could ask the committee to just take a special look at kind of 156 on, just to make sure that we haven't created a situation where even with commercially best efforts, they swing around and all of a sudden they get trapped inside of something that I don't believe is the author's intent. Mm-hmm. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Don't see any other questions. We do have a couple of speakers on this. Sarah Hunt Blackwell. Is she here?
Should they report their age when they come up too? Or?
I don't think she's here. Nathaniel Da Silva. Now there's somebody that knows his way around a computer.
I defer to him.
Tell us who you are.
I'm 15 years old. My name is Nathaniel Da Silva, and I'm representing the youth of Fulton County. I'm a Fulton County Youth Commissioner, and I'm here today to express my support for Representative Hilton's bill, HB 1296.
All right, so you know what this man's talking about and what that man's talking about, is that
yes.
right? Okay, all right, I'm glad somebody does.
Yes, okay. I'll just start off, and then I can talk about the VPN thing after. So, social media is often referred to as a cigarette for our generation, and it's 100% that's what it is today. The only difference is 8-year-olds are using it, and 97% of teens, the Surgeon General office has found that they're using social media. And I'm here as a 15-year-old. I've saw its troubling widespread effect all around me. Like, social media software was never designed for kids, and the government the CDC specifically found that 95% of teenagers and 40% of kids aged 8 to 12 years old are using social media algorithms. Most algorithms want 13 and older, but yet 40% of kids have underage accounts, right? And like, little children are being ensnared in these technologies, and big tech is just trampling over them, and the AI is to blame 100% because it has things like push notifications, autoplay, infinite scroll, and this AI has been developed with psychologists to specially target kids, leading to studies showing that social media has led to levels of addiction similar to pathological gamblers and drug abusers. And this is my generation's cigarette. The algorithm creates huge amounts of addiction, but as long as the content is okay, it's like fine, right? But like, social media was just created as a space for children to interact, but that's just what they tell us. Like, several professors started a study, and they found that algorithms have led to a direct increase in suicide-related, pornographic, and disorder-related content. And extreme, inappropriate, and harmful content is easily accessible and widely accessible by children. Self-harm inflicted injuries are the second highest cause of death for young children and teens solely because of social media. That's the Surgeon General's office. A study was conducted by CNN and the CDC, and within 15 minutes, suicidal-related content was fetched by the algorithm specifically to a children's account with children's protections on them. If we look to Georgia right now, more than in the Georgia, the Georgia Department of Education surveys over 400,000 school members in all Fulton County of Georgia schools, and it's found that more than 1 in 10 students have considered seriously accepting suicide, and that's just a survey. So that number's just going up. It's exponentially grown by 200% over the last 4 years, and more little children are using social media in these 2 years than they have in the last 4 years. And not if the content is bad enough, it makes it so easy for sexual predators to get onto these platforms. Social media and online, the FBI has found that social media and online applications are the primary tool. 87% of sexual grooming occurs on social media. And the majority of these accounts are underage. So now that it's been established that social media is directly harmful to all children, like the Surgeon General office, Dr. Vivek Murthy, found that even 13 years old is too young to be using social media. Now the bigger problem is these children's brains are developing. A majority of children have underage accounts. That's what his bill addresses. And while these children's brains are developing, by using social media, it's seen to have long-term psychological effects. That the brain develops differently while using social media, and that's caused to increased sensitivity, increased impulsiveness, and lower decision-making comprehension. So social media is a scourge across Georgia and the entire country. So what's the solution? That's legislation, and that's where HB 1296 comes in. We can't wait for big tech to make moves to solve this, because half of the studies that I just referred were conducted by the Instagram Association. They know the problem. They aren't solving it. And that's why it's up to us. A majority of parents don't agree with their children using social media, and 68% of 9 to 12-year-olds use social media underage. This bill has a series of provisions that are extremely good at solving the problems that are prevalent. The first is it verifies age, not just by the algorithms, but also through live calls and government ID verification. And there's also a provision in order to stop unnecessary collection of data, lessening the power of AI. And finally, you solve innocent kids from being groomed online by preventing adults from directly messaging them, which is allowed right now. Surprisingly enough, like if I'm an adult, I can go and directly message an 8-year-old with no restrictions put upon myself. This bill saves so many lives. As a teen, I have a little brother. I've seen the effects with my own eyes. I'm part of that 5% of the population that doesn't use social media. And when I see 6th and 5th graders with their eyes glued to the screen, watching increasingly radical content, I have to act. And that's why I'm here today. I suggest that the Senate Judiciary Committee push this bill forward and make Georgia a trailblazer with the coalition of 5 states that have stopped the unauthorized trampling of big tech on the future of our country. Every phone that a little boy or girl possesses is a portal to child predators, to self-harm, to bullying, to psychological war. But we live in Georgia. We live in the USA. No matter what anyone says against this bill, just know that today you have the opportunity to put that little boy and little girl first. Thank you.
All right. Now, you heard the concerns that Chairman Jones had.
Yes.
Can you address those?
Okay, so I think the main unaddressed concern was the VPN, right?
I think it's not the VPN. The VPN exists. What I was asking these learned attorneys is, as you look at the civil and the criminal penalties and also the private right to action, it speaks to the idea of going against this can cause that private right to action, also civil and criminal. I don't want there to be an inadvertent, no matter what big tech has done to your comments, they shouldn't be trapped in something where they could not be reasonably concerned. They could not be reasonably have stopped that or thwarted that. So I was really asking, I guess you could say, the folks around the table to make sure as we review those lines, are we able to, in a sense, put Kevlar around that?
Yeah, so that's like the Section 230 dilemma, like the replacing Section 230. Like, if I replace it and these companies aren't able to solve it, like, are we holding them liable for something they can't solve, correct?
Well, 230 is the public square argument, which of course I'm a fan of the public square. I'm not necessarily a fan of 230, but that's a whole another discussion. This is.
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
What in all seriousness, Judge Gunner, pardon me, Chairman Gunner, what I'm comfortable with, if the folks around the table are saying, hey, there's not a trap here that somehow Bobby or Sally come around,
Yes.
get the VPN, go through Denver or go through London, do this, and then suddenly, as I keep reading all these things, maybe penalties, fines, right to actions, and things like that, we suddenly just start creating all of this for the tech companies. May they be big tech or may they be a startup. I don't want someone out of Georgia Tech who's starting up a company to get trapped in this either. So I'm just asking the question out loud because I don't know enough to know, is it protecting? That's all.
Where are the breaks then?
Is there one? And if there's not one, we're good.
Yeah. Okay.
So what this bill does is it says if they take reasonable measures.
Correct.
And I think that's the big differentiator. We're not going by the result of how much they've removed. What we're going by is the fact that either they implement all of these solutions, right? So like you have the document with you, like they implement all of the solutions. There's many, but an example would be having government ID verification. These are very simple measures that they can implement. And when these are implemented, that's effectively putting the Kevlar around them. They don't have to move forward from that and show, oh, we've prevented this much and we haven't been able to prevent this. And they won't be held liable as long as they have made appropriate measures. Because right now they aren't. Right now they haven't made appropriate measures for solving the issues. This bill lays out examples for appropriate measures that are not very difficult to implement. And in the future, these can be implemented.
So my concern, notwithstanding, I love the color of your tie, and if it had blue in it, I'd like it even more. But my concern, respectfully, is someone pings off of a server in London and says, to Representative Hilton's point, it's a 26-year-old, minor or construction worker or something to that effect. They're not going to initiate, and rightfully so, they don't have the time or the manpower to initiate, I'll say, a phone call to go ahead and do that number. They're going to basically assume that it's a 26-year-old construction worker, and then at that point then possibly look at AI and ML in terms of scraping that information. Again, I don't want to and sorry, Judge Gunner, I don't want to take too much time with the committee. I was just concerned, is there something in here that could cause a hole that we could easily close, and if not, I'm good.
Okay. I would say that if they did that, they wouldn't be held liable. If they did what you said, if they had an AI that would scrape the data, then they wouldn't be liable. Like these are 8-year-olds who are like saying they're 25-year-old minors. These aren't like 30-year-old hackers or anything. They're not going to be able to bypass it to that point. And in the end, they're not trying to get on social media. That's not their goal. They're just trying to get on there and they're being held victim. And because of that, you have all of the prevalent issues.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Evans.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to attempt to, I think there is something in the bill that addresses Chairman Jones's concern. If I'm reading it correctly, section or lines 174 to 177. I read this as if you're going to be subject to action because you've led a minor on, you're going to get notice that you've done that, and you've got 45 days basically to kick that person off. And if you cure, then you're not going to be subject to the violations, to the penalties. I think I'm reading that correctly. And if I am, I think that would address your concern perhaps. But if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong.
Here's a question for you, and thank you very much, Representative Evans. Does 74 to 76 also apply to 78 to 87, or 178 to 187? The lines after that talk to the division may initiate a civil action against a person who, et cetera, et cetera? Because it looks like it does, because it says fail to cure.
If you fail to cure, then you're in trouble.
So that subsequent language would close that gap, assuming the fact that they are noticed and then they have that ability to cure.
I think it does.
Okay. All right. Then Chairman, I'm good. I just wanted to make sure, because I do think it's realistic that we can expect not the 8-year-old possibly, but possibly the 8-year-old, but definitely the 12 or 13-year-old to do something like that.
All right, thank you very much. All right, Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming. You renew my faith in the future of Fulton County and the state of Georgia. So I know it was a big deal to prepare and come here, and you've done a great job and shed a lot of light on the issue. One thing throughout the bill is the division. That's the Consumer Protection Division. So in addition to the Attorney General, we got the Consumer Protection Division. I think having them looking after minors on social media, that's something good for them to be doing. And then here's my question to you. As a parent of 2 teenagers now, because one of them just turned 20, none of my kids got signed up by their parents on social media. They found it on their own. So I applaud Representative Hilton for doing a better job than me on that. But of your generation, I mean, is it 90% or more of the minors who sign up for the social media themselves on their own and are sort of doing it on their own, and the parents are finding out after the fact, after they've already signed up and started using it? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the majority are doing it on their own. Yeah, because there's studies. I think it's 67% of parents don't want their kids to be on social media, but they're unknowingly on it. It's like just hidden under a facade of like, oh, yep, this is just iMessage, or I'm just talking to them. It's just that facade. I think more light is being shed on it as more and more of these hearings occur, and as more and more of this gets attention. So that issue is becoming less and less. So that's why this bill is pretty important.
I appreciate you shedding light on it. I think there's some accountability that's needed with these social media companies, because they enable these minors to do things out of parental scrutiny, and I think this bill is good for that. And I guess one more thing, you had the analogy about cigarettes. I think it's like crack. So, strengthen that analogy, but it's terrible in the way of attention span, academics, communication skills. So it's terrible. To have the way the social media companies have come down on our minors. So I think having some guardrails in your advocacy has really helped today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I found my new legislative aid for.
Yeah.
Just don't live in my district.
I don't mean to belittle you, but you got a ride home?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, you're 15. I know you didn't drive here, right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
No.
All right.
So, Marta.
All right. I know he's smart enough. All right, hang on. Representative Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to just applaud this young man for coming in front of this committee. And there's a lot of people who are elected in this building or get paid a lot of money to work in this building who are scared to come before this committee and handle themselves the way that you have. And I just want to commend you. You got a bright future ahead of you.
Thank you.
And look forward to learning about you later.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, what's the will of the committee? Oh, we do? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Mike Griffin. I didn't realize that. Okay.
You don't mind giving us your age too, Mike?
It's getting up there.
16.
Yes. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm the Public Affairs Representative with Georgia Baptist Mission Board. This is my 17th year down here. So, but in working with Georgia Baptist, not only do public affairs work, but also child protection policy and dealing with child sex abuse prevention, those types of things. And in dealing with this and doing a number of classes last year for churches and others, we recognize that we've got to put all the guardrails that we can around the most vulnerable among us, and that's our children. And that protection comes from two directions. First of all, from them being accessed and being over sexualization that children are getting today. And, the average age of seeing pornography is somewhere around 9 to 10 years of age. But also a majority of that access comes from not them looking at it, but it's that coming for them. In other words, it's looking for them. And as the one testifying here before me was just mentioning, it also then sets up that space for a sexual predator to then come after that young person as well. And then you have the grooming process and all that that's going on. But also because of the over-sexualization of children, Greg Love, who I work with Ministry Safe, sent me an email while I was teaching a breakout session at one of our classes for Georgia Baptist that 52% of the child sex abuse today, of the calls that are getting in, are peer-to-peer abuse. So this over-sexualization of children is increasing, predators among themselves, even among the minors, are now doing this because they're accessing. So I really appreciate Representative Hilton bringing this up. I think it's so important, and I think it's very practical, and Georgia Baptist would encourage your support on this legislation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you.
Thank you.
And Chelsea with Frontline, is that right?
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. So I'm here to show support for HB 1296, sponsored by Representative Scott Hilton. The implementation of age verification measures for minors accessing social media platforms is essential to mitigate a myriad of just numerous impacts that unrestricted social media access can have on our children. Social media platforms have become ubiquitous in the lives of our young people, as few of the testifying members have said today, providing unprecedented access to a vast array of content and interactions. While these platforms offer numerous benefits, they also present significant risks, particularly when accessed by minors without proper safeguards in place. Some risks of social media, as you've heard today a little bit about as well, are exposure to harmful and inappropriate content, including violence, explicit imagery, and hate speech, and exposure to bullying and exploitation, to name a few. The impact of this exposure has been shown to cause lasting psychological effects and can be detrimental to mental health. It can overstimulate the brain's reward center and lead to, can lead to addiction. It has also been linked to sleep problems, attention problems, anxiety and depression, and issues of self-esteem and body image, normalization of risk-taking behaviors, and feelings of exclusion in adolescence, to name a few. The gentleman, he did state some statistics as well. 97% of children as young as 12 are now on social media, and despite almost 70% saying that social media makes them feel stressed, anxious, and depressed, they continue to stay on the account, and they still use and access. 95% say that they felt helpless when it came to quitting their online habit. Moreover, as mentioned, unrestricted access to social media can facilitate online predation and exploitation of minors by malicious individuals. Predators often utilize social media platforms to groom and manipulate young users, exploiting their naivety and trust. So age verification would also serve as a crucial barrier, making it more difficult for predators to target vulnerable children. Some claim that the government should stay out of these matters and relating to children's online access, and that the decision ultimately belongs to the parents. And while we, wholeheartedly affirm that decision, the decisions pertaining to child's time online does belong to the parents, the age verification requirements actually will place these choices and others back into the hands of parents across Georgia. So by implementing these measures, we can help limit minors' exposure to these harmful effects and encourage healthier online behaviors. And so for these reasons, we ask a favorable vote on HB 1296.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no questions.
Awesome, thanks.
All right. Any last word? Okay. What's the will of the committee? I got a motion and a second. Vice Chair Reeves.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
All right.
Representative Hilton, would an amendment be friendly to add after line 213, a code section 39518, the provisions of this chapter shall be construed as in addition to and in no way limit or abridge any other rights or remedies available at law or equity.
This is Judy, so I'll defer to you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Was there a second on that? Yes. Okay. All right. Motion and a second. Any further discussion of the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Does pretty well when everybody's hungry. All right. Now to the main bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
All right. 1371. You want to do it from there or come over here?
I expect there's going to be a significant amount of testimony that I'll be right here if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. I think everybody has a copy of it. think. Let's see what we got. We have LC 2772, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. If you would, go ahead and tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for hearing House Bill 1371. What House Bill 1371 seeks to do is try to bring some clarity to a very tough issue, an issue of premises liability, particularly when it comes to third-party crimes. What we've done here, and I'll just give the committee a sort of the posture and the angle in which I came from. So I guess the initiating litigation or event that occurred was an opinion out of the Supreme Court that surrounded a third-party claim, or excuse me, third-party crimes. And in my opinion, the court, well, in the court's opinion, they laid out what the current law is for third-party crimes in the state of Georgia. And so that was my starting point. What is the law currently as it pertains to a third-party crime for premises liability? Now, we've had folks from both sides of this issue in the office and trying to talk through a solution to the problem of the perceived problem of litigation against property owners when there's a third-party crime. And so we started very far apart, as you can imagine, and we tried to work toward something that and mind you, what we started with on both sides of the issue was not the law. It was a stricter version on one side, which would make it easier to recover, and on the other side, it was a change in standard that would be a willful and wanton standard, and would be a huge change to premises liability in the state of Georgia. And as the committee knows, at least as long as I've been up here, since 2019, with measures like this, we take incremental steps toward a solution. Huge steps and huge swaths and changes in laws have unintended consequences, and that is where I started. And I don't know that we've reached an agreement here. We've got folks on both sides that don't necessarily like the language, but what you see before you is what's come out of our negotiations, and essentially what we've done here is codified parts of the tests that the Supreme Court gave us in premises liability. And what I think that does for the business community is gives them some predictability. This is what you have to do to avoid a claim. This is what you have to do to make a claim. And we added some provisions in here that were not in the opinion. And so I'll start with the highlights of the provisions that we added. Here we go. One of the provisions is in line 43 that says, many of the folks that I spoke to with regard to premises were having issue, particularly in my morning coffee caucus. They didn't think that it should be lawful for someone to come on the property of someone else's and commit a crime and then be able to recover against that property owner. So we specifically said in line 43, 44, and 45, where the claimant came upon the owner or occupiers premises or approaches for the purpose of committing a crime punishable by more than a felony, 1 year of prison under the law, they could not bring a claim. That's one of the provisions that is outside of what the Supreme Court's decision is. Secondly, the business community is very concerned about how much crime is in the area and them not having to become the police. And I totally agree with them. They should not have to become the police. And being in a high crime area shouldn't just be in and of itself the element that gives rise to a claim. And that's just common sense and practical in my opinion. So we also put that in lines 83, 84, and 85. Essentially, if you're in a high crime area, you do not, that in and of itself doesn't give rise to a claim. The meat of the bill recites the reasonable person standard and the totality of the circumstances standard. And the court was explicit in how they addressed each one of these elements, and it was a reasonable person standard. And that is the basis of where this bill came from and how we got to where we are now. And I know the hour is late. I don't want to beat the bill up. I know there's going to be a ton of testimony on this bill, but that is how we've gotten to where we are. This is a codified version of the Carmichael case with some provisions that have chipped away sort of at the standard, some incremental steps toward a solution. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions, or we can move into testimony.
All right, Vice Chair Reeves.
Whip Burchett, on line 46, there's a reference to code section 16-5-46. And First Lady Marty Kemp's worked diligently in fighting human trafficking, as have a lot of members of this committee and the House and Senate. So human trafficking, that's not defined as a crime when it says you can't be a criminal perpetrator and then make a claim against the landowner. But victims of human trafficking are not defined as criminals under this bill. Right?
Very good. Yeah, that is correct, Vice Chairman Reeves, and appreciate your input on the bill.
Okay. All right, I don't see any other questions about it. All right, at this time I'll go to the witnesses. Let's see. I want to start with those that oppose it. Skin Edge.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to come before you this evening. Before I start, I do want to express my appreciation to Whip Burchett. He has been very gracious in allocating a lot of time to me. We've met in his office for several hours. We've talked on the phone over the weekend and other times at night, and I appreciate that. We don't agree on this one, and we don't have an agreement. I want to make that clear. But I think as two good lawyers, we can fight and fuss, and at the end of the day, we can shake hands and go have a drink together. So I'll say that from the outset.
I'll take ice water.
But let me start off by saying that I'm here in two capacities. One, I represent my client, NASCO. They are the nation's largest contract security association. Their member companies employ more than 500,000 highly trained security officers that service the public and private sectors throughout the state of Georgia and the United States. But also, I've been authorized to speak on behalf, basically, for virtually the entire business community of the state. We've been holding meetings and discussions on this legislation now for several weeks. We've had meetings with people from retail, from groceries, grocery stores, the insurance industry, the Metro Chamber, the Georgia Chamber. You've got letters in your file, I think, from NFIB and others. So the business community, I think, is united on this, as I've seen very few times in my experience down here at the state capitol. And the reason they are, and we are so united, and the reason we're frankly very much against this bill, is that we've got a crisis in two areas in the state of Georgia. Number one, we've got a crisis in the insurance and business sector. Businesses are facing unprecedented lawsuits and verdicts arising from the Supreme Court decision that Representative Burchett alluded to earlier, dealing with third-party criminal acts when third parties come onto a premises of a business, commit a crime, for instance, shooting someone, and then the business is sued even though they had nothing to do with the shooting. We also have insurance companies that are, number one, leaving the state of Georgia or reducing their coverage or cutting their coverage and telling business that we're not going to cover you, or we're going to limit the coverage you can have for acts like this, these third-party liability acts. So we've got a huge, huge problem in the state of Georgia from the insurance standpoint and the business being unable to get insurance. As a result of that, a lot of businesses are left uninsured or they're closing, or they're going bankrupt if they're hit with a big verdict. The second crisis that we've got in this state as a result of this situation is that businesses, because of their exposure to liability in these type of cases, are either moving or closing down. And that results in many areas of the state, particularly in the more urban areas of the state, but all over the state really, you end up with food deserts, pharmacy deserts, and other situations where the residents of those areas cannot get some of the essentials of life because those businesses are very concerned or afraid of being sued for an act that is beyond their control. And so you've got those two areas. You've got a crisis in business and insurance, and you've got a crisis in food deserts, pharmacy deserts, and the like. And that's why I want to talk a little bit about this bill and why we're opposed to it. Representative Burchett mentioned the cases that were decided not long ago. This was back on June 29th, 2023. And I want to quote for the committee a little bit from these cases because I think it's very instructive. In those cases, there were 3 cases that were consolidated. The Supreme Court examined the extent of liability faced by premises owners, occupiers, and security contractors involving third-party criminal conduct. The court declared that the test for whether a third-party criminal attack is reasonably foreseeable is now an assessment of the totality of the circumstances, whatever that means. The test exponentially expands an owner's, and by extension any of the owner's contractors, including security providers, potential liability for damages caused by third-party criminal acts. Now this is the interesting part, and you really usually don't see this in court decisions, Supreme Court decisions, Court of Appeals decisions. All 3 of the authoring justices in these consolidated cases recognize the severe impact their decision would have on Georgia businesses and their customers, especially in areas where retail stores, groceries, and pharmacies are already less available. The justices practically begged the Georgia legislature to take action to negate the impact of their ruling and not to codify their ruling as this bill would do. They even implied that they would have ruled differently had Georgia law allowed it. Let me quote just a couple of things from this opinion. In rendering our decision, these are the justices speaking, in the majority opinion, not a minority opinion, in a majority opinion, we are mindful of the economic and policy arguments advanced by the parties, but such considerations are reserved to the General Assembly. This court is bound by what the law is, not what the parties or the members of this court think it should be. To what extent and under what circumstances proprietors should be held liable for third-party criminal acts are decisions best left to the legislature, which can consider the policy and practical implications, especially in high-crime areas, of increasing such liability and the cost of doing business. And Justice McMillan sharply criticized the majority for abandoning the bright-line rule they previously had and going to this totality of the circumstances test. He went on to say, I am concerned about the impact these laws have on those who reside in high-crime areas and who could face the harsh and mounting reality that businesses faced with an increased exposure to liability because the very area in which they've chosen to do business will cease operation or raise their prices to offset the cost of additional security measures. And I wonder how these forced business decisions will impact the residents who will lose ready access to resources they need for daily life because they are no longer available or affordable. I would urge our General Assembly to consider these issues as they institute laws imposing premises liability on businesses in this state. The impact of this decision has been so punitive to Georgia businesses and their contractors that it appears that the Georgia Supreme Court may have intended for it to be a wake-up call to the Georgia General Assembly to pass laws that provide adequate and reasonable protection to Georgia premises owners and their contractors. And frankly, in our opinion, House Bill 1371 does not do that. The justices clearly realize that as a result of their decision, it would become nearly impossible for businesses in higher crime areas to continue to provide basic goods and services. Plain and simple, if the risk of liability is too great and uncertain for businesses in certain areas, businesses will close locations in those areas or they will close if security companies facing the same liability will not provide security businesses in those areas. Now, let me take just a minute to talk about 1371 specifically. And Representative Burchett was right in a sense that a good portion of this bill codifies the decision by the court. And that, frankly, we submit is the wrong thing for this committee and for this General Assembly to do. We think the decision, even though the justices felt their hands were forced, is not the best public policy for this state, and we don't think House Bill 1371 is the best public policy for this state. If you look on page 1 of the bill, lines 14, 15, 16, it's some unusual language. I don't know if I've ever seen this before. Maybe it's happened, but I'm not familiar with it. Where they put in section 1-1, unless displaced by the particular provisions of this act, the General Assembly intends that the substantive law of premises liability in Georgia as it existed on June 30th, 2024 be retained. I mean, that's explicitly saying we want to incorporate the ruling of the court. That's what that's saying. Now, going forward in the bill, in the definition section, beginning on line 23, there's a definition of claimant, of criminal activity, and third party. Nowhere is the definition of an owner of land defined. It just simply refers to an owner of land. It does not then apply to their employees, their independent contractors, or anybody else that happens to be on the premises at the behest of the owner of the land. That is not defined. And we submitted language in our negotiations to provide a definition for owner of land, but it did not make its way into this bill. You go down to section B on lines 33, and you get into the duty owed to an invitee. And you see there where, again, they say you're not liable, but that depends if it's not reasonably foreseeable based on the totality of the circumstances. There's no definition in the bill of what totality of the circumstances means. It's not defined. And what that's going to mean as a practical matter is anytime a business owner is sued in a situation like this, it's going to go to a jury. And the jury's going to have to decide what the totality of the circumstances means. You're not giving any guidance by using this phrase to businesses. They're not going to know what it means. You have to find out on a case-by-case basis. Well, if I put up a fence, is that enough? Or if I put up lighting, is that enough? If I hire security personnel, is that enough? You're not going to know. There is no guidance in this bill because all it does is, again, incorporate the ruling of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is begging the legislature to maybe take another look at this. You get over to line 43, it mentions where the claimant comes upon the owner occupier's premises for purpose of committing a crime. It does not say anything about the third party coming on for the purpose of committing a crime. And most of the time, the situation is going to be the third party comes on the land for the purpose of committing the crime, and the claimant's the one ends up getting shot, and they sued the business. Here, they only reference the claimant, not the third party. Line 47, it says a claimant, this deals with licensees. A claimant for injuries arising from third-party criminal activity where the owner or occupier lacks actual knowledge of prior criminal activity similar to the third-party criminal activity giving rise. When you say prior criminal activity, where is that? Is that next door? Is that one block down the street? Is that in the neighborhood? Where are we talking about? That's not defined. There's no guidance for business there either. Line 56, you go back to totality of the circumstances. And again, on line 69, third-party criminal activity. Again, where? What kind? Is it substantially similar or not? None of that is defined. Now, the other thing I've got to point out that is concerning and brand new, if you'll look on line 101, it deals with the period of statute of limitations. And basically what this says, as I understand it, is if you've got a situation where you've got a third-party criminal act and somebody's been injured is going to file suit, the statute of limitations is told until the prosecution, look on line 106, 107, is told until the prosecution of the crime has become final or otherwise terminated. We all know sometimes how long these criminal cases drag on, years sometimes. What if they're convicted and there's an appeal filed? It hadn't been terminated. That could take even longer. And so you're creating new law here. This is new law. And we don't think this has any place in this bill when we're dealing with third-party liability. We think that's brand new law that ought to be debated on its own merits and not stuck in this particular bill. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can understand, after I've gone through this, why the business community is so concerned about this bill and why we cannot support it. And believe me, we've made every effort to try to come to a compromise. I'm sorry we haven't been able to come to a compromise. That was our goal, and it's something I'm still frankly open to continue the dialogue and discussions if we can do that. But I'll leave you with this. This bill basically codifies the Supreme Court's decision. So right now, the Supreme Court's decision is the law of this state. Well, if this is just codifying the Supreme Court's decision, why do we need the bill? The decision's already there. The law's already there on the books. We don't need a bill to restate what the Supreme Court's already done. So if you're happy with the state of the law, if you think what the Supreme Court did is right, you don't need this bill, and you don't need to support this bill. However, if you're also unhappy with the current state of the law, which the business community is, we think there's a desperate need for change, then you cannot support this bill either. So either way, I don't see how this bill should move forward. If you're satisfied with the law, you don't need the bill to codify it. If you're not satisfied, you don't need this bill, you need another bill. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your time again.
Yes, sir. Vice Chair Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few questions, and I'll try to work through them briefly. All right, Senate Bill 186, which was a premises liability bill, it didn't pass last year, and to date, it has not passed the Senate, right?
It has passed out of committee, substitute, and is in Senate rules.
Okay. A lot of the premises liability or negligent security issues revolve around, some surprise event or a first-time event or criminal or drug dealer activity that was not foreseen. It was kind of a first-time event, right?
Right.
And I'm seeing a couple things in this bill that appear to pertain to that, where you've got criminals can't assert the claim, third-party criminal activity, that's not the basis of the claim unless there's a pattern of it, things like that,
You
right?
would have to prove that they came on the premises for the purpose of committing a crime. Sometimes I can see where that might be difficult if something happens before they've done whatever it is they were intending to do. How are you going to prove that? But I see your point.
And on the 2005 tort reform, and a lot of that was in the medical arena, the court spent years striking various portions of that bill in which, there wasn't kind of an agreement. It was sort of an aggressive package, and then the court spent years striking various parts of it, right?
And parts were upheld.
So there are some benefits of putting on the books something that the courts, have said before and would probably be receptive to, right?
Well, I would submit to you, if you're in agreement with the policy, we're not in agreement with the finding of the court, and so we don't see the benefit of putting into statute a decision that we think impacts business in such a negative way.
Okay. 10 years ago, Georgia first became, the number one place to do business, and we've gotten that renewed for 10 years now, but I've heard from folks in the business community you believe premises liability's gotten worse during that time.
Absolutely.
So that's a fairly recent change in y'all's belief, right? It's something so having a lengthy statute on the book to give courts direction, trial courts, that's something that could help restore the long-term premises liability law in Georgia that seemed to have worked for decades, right?
Again, you could give them guidance. The question is, what kind of guidance do you want to give them? We think this gives the wrong guidance.
And that gets to my question is there, do y'all have an alternative? Do you have anything for us to work with tonight?
I don't have anything to work with tonight. We've submitted, I think, three different drafts over the course of the last few weeks in negotiations, and then this bill came out last Thursday, I think, and so that's been it. So we do not have. We have the bill we're supporting in the Senate, but again, I would say to you that we're willing to still continue to try to come to some agreement on a bill. I realize crossover day is Thursday. I also realize, having been around this place for a while, that if we can come to an agreement, there are plenty of vehicles out there. We can strip a bill, add it to another bill, whatever. There's ways to do it. This bill doesn't have to. I don't think your hand is forced because crossover is day after tomorrow. I think there's ample time, if we can come to some understanding, to put it on a proper bill.
Thanks for your work on premises liability.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Leverett, you the one?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good evening.
Good evening.
I just want to understand a few background things. Do you contend the Court of Appeals decision this summer radically changed the law of premises liability in Georgia?
Yes, sir. We do.
In what respect?
In that it considered these cases and came up with this new phrase, totality of the circumstances, which had never been used before. And I think it just opened the door for more and more actions against business by doing that. Whereas before there was more of a situation where what was foreseeable. Now you look at, well, was there crime in the neighborhood? Was there crime? Are you aware of any crime? The question is, what are you liable for, according to what you know? If you know something happened a mile down the road, does that put you in a situation where you've got to do something to deal with that? We don't know.
Well, but I mean, totality of the circumstances is not an uncommon term in a negligence case, is it? I mean, that's fairly commonly used.
I mean, I've heard it before, but not in this context.
Not in the context.
Decision.
Not in the context of premises liability
Right.
before that decision.
That's
Okay.
right.
So you contend that cases or trio of cases changed premises liability pretty substantially. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So with respect to the bill, one of your arguments was, well, you're just recodifying that
Mhm.
law, but that you mentioned the unless displaced by the particular provisions of this act language on line 14, correct?
Yes.
All right. So that, I mean, I don't, and I'm not intimately familiar with the state of this law and how it's developed, but that would suggest to me that there is at least some change within the bill to the law as articulated by the court in that
I would
decision.
acknowledge there's some changes. It's not totally and only a codification of the decision. There's some changes, but we think the bulk of the bill is codification of the decision.
And I would assume you contend that the changes being made, to the extent there are changes being made, are not sufficient to give your clients comfort and guidance.
That's it in a nutshell.
So you are asking for a bright line rule. Do you have an example of what kind of bright line rule you want? If there's no criminal activity on your property?
Yes, Representative, one thing we've discussed in our discussions and negotiations is if you had a situation where you had prior criminal acts on your property, and then a third party commits a criminal act on your property, and you had knowledge of the prior criminal acts, and the third party committed a substantially similar criminal act, then we can see where there could be liability there. We understand that. That's been our sort of suggestion as to what we think the appropriate way to deal with this is. We can't make business owners responsible for everything around them and make them the police, as was stated earlier. But we think if we're in a situation where we've had prior criminal acts and we had knowledge of them, then that's a different situation.
Well, and I would assume, though, that the totality of the circumstances takes some of that into consideration.
Well, it goes way beyond that. I mean, the totality, it doesn't limit it to your property.
True, but I don't know if crime is, if people all around you are getting hit all the time, I'm not sure it's a fair conclusion if you just say, well, that's never gonna touch me. I would think we would want to encourage the property. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying because I've been sued before too for a premises liability issue. So I understand, but it would just, I guess my concern is to the extent you create a bright line rule, you are potentially lessening the incentive for business owners to make sure their customers are safe, and you're potentially allowing them to ignore what they do have knowledge of and what a normal human being, how a normal human might respond to it.
I think the average businessman or woman is not going to ignore that. They want what's best for their customers. And if they realize there's a situation, then they're going to take the appropriate steps. But right now, we don't know what steps to take. When you talk about totality of circumstances, like I said earlier, does that mean, okay, I've got to look at crime 5 miles down the road? And do I have to put up lighting? Do I have to have a security guard? We don't know. We don't know.
Okay.
That's our problem. And that's impacting the lack of availability or affordability of insurance too, because of the uncertainty.
Okay. One final question, Mr. Chairman, I'm done.
Yes.
With respect to section 2-1 on page 5, that is the tolling of the statute of limitations. It did not seem to me that affects a radical change in the law. The only thing is adding of a couple of the statutes, which I think are wrongful death. So and I want to make sure I understand, how do you contend, the general rule on tolling doesn't seem to be affected, and it's not changed, at least if I'm reading the statute right, but how do you contend that is a excessive or radical, or that's something?
It's been done in some areas, just I think in this area, I think is a change, is a major change.
Well, it does say cause of action in tort, and would not a premises liability case sound in tort?
Well, yeah, it would, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the impact of this, but my understanding of it is that it expands that to these specific situations, which had not happened before, unless I'm misreading that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Representative Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
Part of my questions were answered in your exchange with Chairman Leverett. So I understand what you're saying about where you would draw the line, I guess, for something that's foreseeable on the exact property. I want to try to get a better understanding of what you see as foreseeable around the property. And I'm going to ask it this way. If I have a business and to my left and my right, I know there's been multiple acts of gun violence on both properties, would you agree with me that the landowner that's in between those two is now on notice, and they should be taking reasonable measures?
I think if they have knowledge of that, yes. The question though goes, if a third party who they have no control over commits an act on their property, I guess you're saying?
Well, I'm asking the foreseeability,
Right.
and I think you agree that if the landowner has seen violence on their property on multiple occasions, they're now on notice and they need to do something, right?
They're on notice and they could make the decision to do something. The question is, could they be subject to being sued because a third party committed a criminal act that they had no control over? I think that's the basic question. How much responsibility are you going to put on a business owner because of what some random third party did? That's really the question.
So maybe your exchange with with Chairman Leverett didn't provide as much clarity as I thought. I understood your exchange with Chairman Leverett to say that you recognize on behalf of the business community that you're here to represent that if there's crime on your property as the landowner,
yes,
obviously that's performed by a third party,
right,
not the owner, not the employees, but people are coming on the property regularly.
On your property.
Yes, and there's violence.
Correct.
Would you agree that the landowner is
Yes.
on notice and should take security
Yes.
measures to protect?
Yes.
Okay. So if third parties are committing crimes to the left and to the right, but sort of there's been a halo effect for the business in the middle, is that business on, would you be comfortable in saying that business has reason to foresee that there is harm to their clientele and they should take security measures?
Representative Evans, I guess I would answer this. Where do you draw the line is the problem.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out. Would you at least agree, if I'm here and there's issues on the left and issues on the right, and I know about them, that's enough? At least we can. I'm trying to figure out where we do agree.
Perhaps it would be. And Representative Burchett can tell you we've wrestled over this concept of premises and property and how to define it and what parameters put on it. The problem is we don't have parameters in this bill.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I take from your answer, and if I'm wrong, tell me. It doesn't sound like there is anything you would agree would be enough for the owner in the middle to be on notice, even if it's to the left and to the right.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we could come up with a reasonable standard or definition for what constitutes premises or what abuts it, maybe something along those lines, that's something I think we could take a look at.
What would you propose?
The problem is where do you draw the line?
Where would you draw it?
I don't know. I'd hesitate to say right now. Right now, what I'm authorized to say is our property.
Just your property.
Just our property. If there's a way to keep it narrow and focused that perhaps might extend a little bit, again, how much that's the devil in the details. That's something we'd consider, but I can't sit here and tell you tonight if that means 100 feet or 100 yards or 2 blocks or 1 block or what.
What if it's on the public sidewalk in front of your business and you know it?
If there have been
shootings,
stabbings. If the side perhaps, and we're talking about hypotheticals here, but if the sidewalk was, right there leading right into your business, that's something we could talk about.
I think the only thing we can agree on between the bill and what you would like to see, where foreseeability would be your exact property, and maybe the sidewalk, and that's it. That's it.
Well, I can't. I'm not going to say that's it right now, but all I can do is speak to this bill, and the bill doesn't deal with any of that.
Well, I was just hoping that we could maybe get to that next step, but thank you.
Well, and I'd love to do that, and I'd welcome any suggestions you've got. We've certainly been knocking our heads together trying to come up with something along those lines. I would welcome that suggestion.
Thank you.
Representative Stoner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm not a lawyer, and you would never want me to help you on anything from that legal standpoint. What I can talk to for a lot of the folks on this committee, y'all know me because I own Dairy Queens. In fact, some members actually go to one of my Dairy Queens. Tyler down there.
I'm a big Blizzard fan.
There you go. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
But what y'all may not know is my family owns many pieces of property around the state. I have property in Perry, Georgia. I have property in several parts of the state. Some neighborhoods are better than others. But I'll tell you already, this has had an impact. I pay insurance just like anybody else does on property. And I can already tell you, my insurance rates have gone up specifically because of this issue. I've been told that by my insurance agents. I had one piece of property just recently I just did my liability on that went up by $1,200 on the premium, and the reason given to me was this issue. So, I'm just telling you what the impact I'm seeing as someone who's a business person.
Yes.
And what I'm seeing, what's immediately happening. And it isn't just me. Everyone I'm talking to is having this issue. As to the point of this bill, and I understand y'all have attempted to work something out, but I've been around here long enough to know that sometimes we rush to try to make something. And I've seen a lot of mistakes made. I'd rather not us do anything until we have some more time. I know as a business owner I would like this issue resolved and clarified because I guarantee you my insurance rates will probably go up again next year.
Yes.
So that's how the view I take on this.
And Representative, I will say that I think there's going to be a gentleman that follows me. He's going to testify from the insurance industry who's going to give you some more specifics on that. And as far as your discussion about time, I'd simply say this, that we've got about 4 or 5 more weeks left in this session. I'm willing to spend as much time as we need trying to hammer something out if we can get some done this year so you don't face that again next year.
Representative Stoner, was the increase attributed to the case law in Georgia or to circumstances surrounding your property?
No, it was specifically to the case law. It was specifically to the case law. I mean, you know, as someone, I'm in a unique position because obviously I serve down here and I deal with these issues, so I have enough sense to pick up the phone and call and ask, you know, why? Because, you know, my properties, I have lots of cameras. I mean, I can show you a car wash we own. I've got high definition cameras. In fact, the police come and use our cameras for car accidents out for our property because it's so clear. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate, but, you know, accidents and all types of things. My point is, I asked why, because I have had no claims on this property for 20 years. All right? And I said, why? And that was the reason given to me. And I deal with tons of different insurance companies, okay? And I've gotten that on Perry, Georgia. I have a piece of property in front of a Walmart, okay? So it's a little strip shopping center. They're indicating to me that they're probably going to do the same thing down there because, you know, I have a broker who deals with lots of different insurance companies, and we're shopping around to kind of keep those costs down. But I'm being told this. So I'm just, for the committee's sake, and as someone who deals with this on a real basis every day, I'm being told this.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Chair Reeves.
Mr. Edge, one thing in terms of drawing the line, as I was thinking about this, we did the Safer Hospitals Act last year, and in that effort, we set 100 yards from the property. If you can outrun the police in the 100-yard dash, you're good to go. And they've got a call for backup at UGA with College Campus and the HBCU campus police departments. It's 500 yards. So those are two things that are in the law in terms of like a specific zone in addition to the actual premises. Two things.
And I appreciate that. And mine's better than mine. Maybe can come up with something we've been looking for.
Okay. Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would just add to that that I don't think that the circumstances that we're in were foreseeable. I don't think the pandemic was foreseeable. I don't think the rise in crime was foreseeable. I don't think the causation of having that unfortunate man be killed at the Wendy's in 2020 and having 400 police officers for the city of Atlanta walk off the job was foreseeable. I don't think any of this was foreseeable. But I don't think that we can ask business owners to be police because they're not trained and they're not really prepared to do that. I think it's an undue burden on our businesses to ask them to do that. And I really think that with Matt's example, great example, but I think of the young lady that was shot in the parking lot at Saks Fifth Avenue at Phipps Plaza. You know, the sidewalk was right there. If you did 100 yards, you know, then Saks could be liable for an accident on Peachtree right in front of the business. So I don't think that just a specific amount of yardage or whatever is the answer because it's going to be different for different businesses.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions.
Thank you very much.
Mike Iverson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good to see you on this issue. My name's Mike Iverson. It's important to know this, I'm an independent agent, so I don't work for insurance companies. I'm also the immediate past president of the Big I of Georgia, the Independent Agents of Georgia Association. We write roughly almost 90% of all commercial insurance policies independent agents do throughout Georgia. So I have news for you. We are the market. Right? It's our job to help clients navigate insurance. And what does that mean? We want good coverage for our people. Right? We want good terms for our people. Right? All of those are variables inside of the marketplace. And so we have members spread all across Georgia in all of your communities working with businesses inside of your communities. Right? And I'll tell you this, these communities, they're an ecosystem. They're an ecosystem that we have to find ways to protect. And right now, it is out of balance. A year ago, the community came down to the Capitol and we were optimistic that something would be done with public liability. However, nothing occurred. And then we had a Supreme Court ruling in June late June, that would then make things horrendously worse for our industry. And if you look at what's taking place, what you realize is when you have a volatile and unpredictable environment, it is very difficult to call that insurable. And I look on this and I say, you guys aren't in insurance. I don't expect you to understand all of insurance. I don't. But to understand that it's a business, just like anything else is a business, and when presented with problems, you figure out how do we get through these problems. And so there are strategies that are taking place across the industry. Right on the extreme end, you have insurance companies like Donegal who just left the state, said, no, thank you, we don't want to play there anymore. There's other companies who say, you know what, let's just change our appetite. All the industries that have lots of walk-up customers, let's just not write it anymore. Let's write the other types of businesses. Let's focus on lower casualty stuff like manufacturing. Let's focus on places where the public doesn't go and they're not invited. The other strategy that's there is decrease your exposure if you're an insurance company. Don't leave the state. Just reduce how much you're willing to put out there. So in the olden days, we could get $10 million in umbrella with the same carrier that wrote the primary million. That is not the case. Those days are gone. Outside of that, the other thing you can do is just exclude the crap out of everything that you don't want to cover. And I have news for you. Our inaction in this state, along with that Supreme Court ruling, is causing all of those things to take place. You can go on the Georgia surf system if you want to do some searching for yourself. I managed to take a peek. There's a lot of things taking place and a lot of filings taking place and a lot of notices taking place that are going to cause devastating problems for our communities, including mine and including yours. So inaction and this bill codifying a Supreme Court ruling that the industry feels is devastating and makes it even less predictable what's going to occur is something we find unacceptable. So with that, how can I help you in analyzing this situation from an insurance standpoint?
All right, well, if we were to make the changes that the insurance industry would like to see, would that bring down costs for the policyholder?
Well, I think the first thing we should say is what's going to happen if we don't. Can we start there? Because I can tell you what's already happening. If we just look at the filings over the past 8 months in the state of Georgia, and I would invite you guys to talk to the insurance commissioner and say, are any of these things true? They're all in the SURF system. You can Google it yourself. So here's one, Nationwide, one of the top 5 writers. Nationwide Small Markets has made the decision to discontinue writing grocery stores, gasoline stations, liquor stores, motels, hotels, and will non-renew all of these policies over the next year. Okay, great. One of the top 5 writers is choosing not to write these risks. Let's go on to others. This came in yesterday. Another major company, auto owners. We're going to introduce an assault and battery exclusion. So any assaults or batteries that take place, we're going to exclude it from coverage. Now imagine being a broker in my industry where you want to represent clients, you want to manage an ecosystem to protect everyone, not only the business owner, but the injured party. It sure is nice when there is monies to take care of injured parties. Okay, how about this? State Auto, assault and battery exclusion. Progressive, on their little business owner's policy, assault and battery exclusion. Here's Federated Insurance with a broad abuse and molestation exclusion. Here's Columbia with a human trafficking exclusion. Here's Hartford with punitive damages. Here's another one for human trafficking. Here's another for assault and battery. Here's another one for firearms or weapons. So anything that takes place on your property involving a firearm or a weapon, liability is not going to extend coverage to, not even in defense. So I guess what I ask you, Mr. Chairman, is what is the cost of inaction? Can I guarantee rates are going to go down? I can guarantee that coverage is on the edge of degrading to a level that I find is unsustainable, and I'm shocked that we would want to put not only our businesses in peril, but injured parties in peril where there's no monies to be tapped.
Vice Chair Reeves.
Mr. Iverson, I'm looking around the committee, and maybe half or less do litigation involving insurance. Some do criminal defense, some do things dealing with cash payments rather than insurance. So an exclusion, let's run how that works. If you've got an incident on a piece of property and you've got the exclusion, then it either doesn't get compensated or there's liability for the property owner for that exclusion, right?
Yeah, in its broadest sense, you know, one of the most powerful things insurance does is offer a defense for false allegations, right? A blanket exclusion doesn't care whether it's false or not. There is no defense. Therefore, no coverage even for payment for the other party in that broad exclusion.
So if you have an exclusion, that falls on either the property owner or there's no claim that would get paid there if the law says that's not a compensable injury. For instance, if 1371 says you can't make a claim on somebody's property if you're there committing a crime. You can't make a claim if there's like a first-time unforeseen criminal activity on the property. That's not compensable, and then the insurance companies apparently are already excluding some of those incidents anyway, and therefore it would fall on the property owner, it would fall on the police, or it just wouldn't be a claim, right?
You were just denied.
Yeah, I think the
Well,
the
it would
claim
be
is
excluded.
It'd be excluded and denied. Reservation of rights letter would go out and say we're not on this.
So this statute, 1371, would eliminate some of those claims on those excluded events,
Yeah,
right?
I think what you're trying to say here, and I would say that the insurance industry doesn't receive it the same way that you're trying to explain it, because the Supreme Court ruling was the devastating hit that said, wow, foreseeable extends way beyond my property and surrounding properties. Is it foreseeable that I know of a guy in North Dakota or in California had this incident, right? So we have this incredible expansion of it. And then in addition to that, I mean, there's a weirdness to this that I sit here and I just take it back to very fundamental truths. I say to myself, where the representative was talking about, what if someone's on the sidewalk? Well, if someone's on the sidewalk and shoots somebody in my front yard, am I liable for the person on the sidewalk who shot somebody in my front yard? I guess I would be if I was in a high crime area and it was foreseeable that they could have been shot, right? But we're not holding that same regard on individuals who have their homes there. We are on individuals who have their businesses there. And I'm telling you, for a small business owner who can't just uproot and leave, that is their home. That is their golden goose. And in our industry, traditionally, this question came up earlier as well, there's this feel that without everybody overseeing business, good things won't take place. Business owners won't do the right thing. Well, I have news for you. The improved lighting that exists in this convenience store issue has nothing to do with this body. It has a lot to do with our industry because we underwrote those risks differently. Insurance companies came in and said, you know what, convenience store, we want you to make the whole front glass. It used to not be. Everybody remembers that in the olden days, Amoco, little tiny glass. They put in measurements to be able to catch the criminal on heights. They did all these other things to improve the security of the property. And so I'm not saying that there's never a time we don't intervene.
Okay.
But I am saying that you also need to understand that there's mechanisms that are built around good risk management.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you've pointed to some exclusions that are already occurring following the court decision, and then there's a study committee that's going to study what the insurance commissioner is doing about liability. But
and I would say those are filings which I anticipate to be ready to be used.
But apparently some insurance companies are already doing exclusions, and then the way I read this bill says there are some claims that are not going to be valid. I mean, if you're a criminal perpetrator and you're committing a crime on a piece of property, this statute says you don't have a claim. And then if a third party commits a crime against you, and that's unforeseen, that's one of those unexpected first-time events, it's a surprise to everybody, some freak, drug deal or something like that happens that is a first-time event that was not foreseeable. This statute says that's not a very strong claim. So it seems like to me this, in addition to the insurance companies excluding the claims, this bill would narrow the liability.
So again, I think you're benchmarking to what the Supreme Court ruling was, and forgive me, I'll be in trouble with my wife for this one, but this is that moment where she tells me she saved me, $300 by buying something that was $2,000. You know what I mean? I should be excited at the discount that occurred on this tremendous markup. And so there's a tremendous markup that's occurred in the marketplace on public liability, and there has been erosion. Remember that we're determining cases where we're assigning 90% liability to a business for a shooter who came onto their premises. There are cases out there that's what we're seeing. Explain that to me. Was the business owner or their employee, were they the ones shooting someone or committing the crime? I mean, those are tough assignments. And so am I impressed with this bill? No. Do I think it makes a material change off of the Supreme Court? No. Do I think the industry is ready to make things horrible for my clients? Yes. Because like every business owner, they have an obligation. And I don't care whether it's a stock company or a mutual company. I've named a bunch of mutual companies, so anybody wants to demonize insurance companies who are stockholders, they just care about their stock price. Well, guess what? Mutuals are owned by the policyholders. I named mutuals in this grouping.
Okay.
So inaction comes with a price.
All right, you got a lot of blinking lights now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. My wife also tries to sell me that bill of goods. This is how much I saved.
Keep her away from mine.
And every time I ask her where she got something, she says, I've had that. I want to go look where that store is. I've had that. Are you familiar with the fact that Florida passed premises liability reform last year?
Yes. Am I familiar with all of the details of that? No.
That's fine. That's all I wanted to know. Why is it that Florida is also, just recently losing insurance companies, Farmers Insurance, Bankers Insurance, Lexington Insurance, subsidiaries of AIG? So they've passed legislation seeking to tort reform, and they're still losing these folks. And then before you answer that, too, I want to ask respectfully, the chairman asked, will prices go down on premiums if the bill's passed that you want passed? I'd just like to hear an answer of that.
Yeah.
On that, those two things.
Yeah. So the answer on will prices go down, I don't know how we can say prices are going to go down concretely. I don't know that. We were told that a federal health plan would have reduced prices in health insurance, but yet that didn't happen. Prices have continued to go up. What I do know is competition breeds good pricing. It is proven throughout time that competition brings pricing. And I am seeing decreased competition. And what you're seeing in Florida is really a concoction of a bunch of different things. So there's a host of things inside of Florida, whether it's the property markets, not just the liability markets. It's the property markets that are in conjunction with that. And so I'm just going to say that Florida is a completely different beast. And I will also say this is the challenge. So I sit on a board, a group of agents that work with ISO. So everybody has an insurance policy. At the bottom of that it says with permission of ISO or parts of ISO. And we try to bring ideas to ISO on how do we improve coverage, right? How do we change this and to an or? Would you be open to it? How do we improve things for our consumers, right? I called the head of liability lines inside of ISO.
So we can't tell if they're going to go up. And I don't mean to cut you off, but I think we're going off on a bit of a tangent. I don't want to do that. One other question. So these actuaries and these underwriters, they can predict when the price is going to go up, but they cannot predict when the price is going to go down?
Here's what I would say to that. And by the way, where I was headed with ISO was actuarial sound. ISO would say this. Right now, they have no way of understanding how to even calculate what the rates should be on these explosive lawsuits to even be able to give advisory costs. And so the rapid acceleration of social inflation with monster suits, no, the industry doesn't know how to surround it. So if you were to tame that, I guess my question back to you is how strong are you willing to go to tame it so that there are rate reductions? Because if you really want to roll hard, and that's the offer, then there are some things you could probably do
Well,
to
I was just trying to
reduce
get a
rates.
commitment that the price would go down from premiums, but I have yet to hear anybody say they would. So I appreciate that. I do want to sort of elucidate on one topic that you mentioned. You had mentioned that, and I think you're alluding to the CVS case. So where CVS was allocated 95% negligence in the shooting. And I was very concerned with that.
It wasn't the case, but go ahead.
Okay, but I'll give you an example as to why that happens. So CVS was allocated 95% of the negligence and 5% to Carmichael, the guy that was on the property who got shot. And interestingly enough, what happened was the instruction to the jury was, if you find that someone is negligent in their fault, what would you allocate? How much allocation of fault, negligent fault, would you apply to the actors here? So CVS, Carmichael, and the shooter. Well, the attorney did not object. He didn't object to that jury instruction. So the jury did exactly what they were asked. Who was negligent in this issue? Well, when you've got 4 firearm crimes, one within 6 months of the shooting, and then you remove your security guard and your employees are begging for security because they're having an issue with guns being held to their head, the jury said, well, you know what? The shooter wasn't negligent at all. He was purposeful. He meant to shoot Carmichael. So there's no negligence there. And CVS is 95%. And 5% goes to Carmichael because he shouldn't have been there at that late hour. That is how that happened in CVS. So that's how these things get, these narratives start to run, that how is this happening? Well, the fact of the matter is a very legal, specific issue. It was a jury instruction that wasn't objected to and went forward, and that's how it got allocated. That's how it got allocated. But that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't do this area of the law, and I wasn't really familiar with it until reading this case, but it looks like there have been standards for some time, and the general obligation to keep premises safe is something that's like decades of cases and everything. And picking up where Burchett left off, what struck me about that case, which I just read, is that the company itself, the employees and the managers testified that they thought that it was unsafe. So that really easily gets you to
Again, wasn't the case I was
foreseeability.
referring to, but I feel like we're dwelling on a case that wasn't actually the case I was referring to.
Well, it was just the case that initiated this process.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to figure out is, can you give us some examples to sort of operationalize more with like hypotheticals of what you're worried about? I understand the concepts and everything, but like it seems that in this case, which my understanding is led to the drafting of this statute, it seemed to have been very foreseeable, since the employees and managers themselves explicitly warned the company that this is an unsafe place. So what is...
So under the definition of foreseeable, and this is what the representative got to earlier, if it's foreseeable because there was a gun violence next to my property, what are my choices in that moment? Relocate my business, shut it down, or figure out a way that I can no longer profitably operate in order to foolproof this business from any sort of incidents? How much is enough? And this is the perfect Monday morning quarterbacking. I know there was a person who testified in front of this group before on public liability. Colonial Homes has a really remarkable story because they faced so many multiple lawsuits when it was never enough. Never enough. You had parking, you should have put in a gate. Now you added a gate, it wasn't enough, you should add cameras. Now the cameras weren't enough, you should add high-def cameras. Now the high-def cameras weren't enough, you should have security. And now insurance doesn't want to cover armed security, but you should have had armed security in this case. And so the concept of, is there ever enough? I don't think the business community, I know my clients don't understand what is enough. And when they don't understand what is enough, and insurance companies don't understand what is enough, then what do they do in those moments of panic? They stop doing business.
Representative Burchett.
I just wanted to shout out Will Wilson. He and I had a long conversation about this, and I know he's a member of yours. Appreciate you, Will, if you're watching.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the back and forth dialogue.
And we had conversations with a bunch of our members, and by the way, they are all willing to reach out. Some of them wrote letters that came with me to say this problem's real.
All right.
It's coming to your community.
Vice Chair.
You mentioned real quick, Mr. Iverson, I had a question. You mentioned what can they do? Over the last several years, there's been an increase in crime in some parts of Georgia, right?
Indeed.
And so police getting on top of that's one thing that could happen, right?
Oh, I think policing, and the expectation of businesses being the police is just such a tall expectation.
The businesses getting the police to step it up in light of a national and local crime wave over the last few years is one thing that can be done.
As the police departments is what you're saying. More police on the streets.
And I think most of them do a good job, but there are some places that need to step up their game on the policing, and I think property owners, playing a role in creating some urgency on that would has helped in some areas and would help in others, but. We've got House Bill 1371 in front of us here like a day or two. Crossover day is 2 days from now. What are you asking us to do here with this time we've got left?
Well, I mean, bluntly, I think you have two parties who are very far apart on this particular issue. And candidly, I don't feel those parties come together without tremendous pressure. I think there's been willingness. I mean, at least the businesses I work with and the business community as well as the insurance community, we just want predictability. We want a good understanding of the rules and a good understanding of what that looks like. And so the concept of this particular bill and one more kind of bugaboo that I would see inside it is not only the foreseeable, kind of the broad foreseeable line, but I just lost my point. Son of a gun. I just blanked.
Senate Bill 186 didn't pass last year. It hadn't passed already this year.
Yes.
If we don't vote on House Bill 1371, that's zero in 2024. Wouldn't it be better to move 1371 forward and have some activity in the way of premises liability rather than doing nothing?
I can only. I mean, this is not my background, so I'll tell you this. If the intent was that you were going to find resolution and actually create that resolution, real meaningful reform, then that would be powerful. But nothing short of that, if the intent is just move this forward and then squash things in committee, elsewhere, rules, et cetera, I think that's concerning for everybody who's watching because I mean, I'm getting educated on this process over the past few years. I'm diving in more than I ever did before. My eyes are wide open and I'm learning the politics. This is a political issue and it shouldn't be. This is a community issue. And I don't know why we wouldn't all want to solve a community issue. But you know what? Here we sit making it politics. I'm disappointed.
Representative Leverett.
I know the hour's late, and I appreciate your time coming here because I know it's not particularly fun appearing before a committee.
I don't mind.
Well, I appreciate your time anyway. So I guess your position, and it may very well be correct because I confess I don't do this kind of work, is that the Carmichael case or the CVS case represented a departure from existing law with respect to premises liability. I think that was certainly the previous witness's position, and I'm assuming that's your position and the position of the industry. This is a change.
Yeah, and the esteemed gentleman before me did a wonderful job, I think, of underlying that even the justices said, hey, there's a problem here. They knew it in their ruling.
Well, they did, but they usually don't say that if they change something. They don't change something and say, and go ahead and make our day and tell us we're wrong. usually that's when they're stating the law. So that's and again, I don't have any actual knowledge, but my understanding is that case was attempting to clarify and restate the law rather than make new law. So I don't know that they've really changed the law that much. I think the one thing that did happen is the verdict was just crazy. I mean, it was really, really high. But I just, to your question about what do businesses do, I think one thing that case shows is when people on the ground in the store are telling their supervisors and their regional managers, we've got a problem here that needs to be addressed. If you don't address it, there's a risk of something like this happening. And I know insurance, to your point, does a really good job of, I guess, I don't know if it would be part of underwriting, I may be using the word wrong, but they do a good job of telling insureds, you need to do something like this here. You need to make these changes. You need to change the way your store is designed. You need to change the lighting. And so the system is sort of designed where that happens. I know I even had to, in my office, had to put in a exit sign and, the lights for fire because of a decision, and I like having insurance too. So to your point, I am concerned. I don't want the companies to go away, and I don't want the coverage to diminish. But I wondered, to the extent you're concerned about this totality of the circumstances being applied unfairly so that things that you might normally expect that you would have to do, you are later Monday morning quarterbacked and compelled to do by a jury. Would it be, you think, advantageous if we were to say, well, look, we've still got totality of the circumstances, but the fact that you're just in a high crime area itself is not enough to impose liability. Would you view that to be helpful?
If it was the way that I read this stated in this particular document is that by itself is not the item. So the question is can you find one other contributing item for that then to become valid? I'm pretty sure on a Monday morning quarterback I can find that one additional thing, and I'm not even an attorney. I'm pretty sure I can find the one additional thing. And so do I put weight in that? I just don't.
Well, to that point, if you can find other things that indicate there was a problem, shouldn't that lead to a conclusion that liability maybe isn't so unfair in that case?
Again, I think it comes back to, I'll use two things here. One, we've talked about a large national company with thousands of locations and a risk management team that looks at each of those locations and then decides to depart a market or not. Then the next one is your local business owner who's doing the best he or she can to serve the community they love. And I got news for you. They employ people. And as long as they have people, there's going to be screw-ups. And those screw-ups have kept me in business. Right? And by the way, our trial attorney friends back here, it's kept them in business too. And it's kept my business owners in business. That's the ecosystem. And it's, I'm telling you, it's out of balance. And if you just look at the figures on what's going to surplus lines and the rate at which it's going to surplus lines, these figures are highly available to you. You can just say, hey, Commissioner's Office, tell us how much has been collected in premium tax for surplus lines. I think it's pretty alarming when you see 120 to 150% increase in surplus lines premiums over the past few years. I think it's compelling.
And when you say surplus lines, tell me what you're talking about.
Surplus lines carriers are not admitted to do business in the state of Georgia, so they do not have to file their forms, endorsements, or anything else. These are the carriers of last resort. So when no one will insure something, we like to have some sort of market to be able to provide it for them. And it is, the surplus lines arena is what I'll call the Wild West. They can design anything they want. And so the protections that our consumers get by admitted carriers, so me as an agent, if I could lay down an admitted carrier and a surplus lines carrier, I'm going to push my client to the admitted carrier because there's protections, there's guarantee funds and other things that take place in the state. If there's insolvency or a host of other things, along with the Commissioner's Office just auditing their files. You go surplus lines, that doesn't exist. So we should be concerned when too much of our business is buying surplus lines. It's not because they're bad business owners. It's because, you know what? It's because of the letter from companies who say, we're done with convenience stores, we're done with grocery stores, we're done with beauty salons. They're going to surplus lines. And by the way, Google underwriting is real. So when you go to surplus lines, virtually, I won't say every, but 95% probably of the apartment complexes throughout the city of Atlanta are all in surplus lines. And they're being underwritten by an underwriter now who says, was there a crime within a mile? And then after the Supreme Court ruling, they say, was there a crime within 3 miles? Let's hang an assault and battery, let's hang a firearms exclusion, let's hang all these exclusions on the policy, which means we have injured parties who may not get paid, and we have business owners with no insurance. I struggle with that.
Well, back to the question though, I mean, you do not feel that that feature itself is attractive or worth anything to you. The provision that says, because my understanding is the concern is right now, someone could just point to the fact that you're in a high crime area and impose liability on you for failing to take steps to mitigate crime that hasn't hit you yet.
Yeah,
But
and
you don't feel like that's really an appreciable advantage to you.
I believe that the industry never believed that the courts would handle it that way, and then the Supreme Court codified it and said this is the way we see it right now. And I think that was very alarming to the industry, because now the question is, like I said, there is no defined distance. It happened in California, it could happen here. It happened in Seattle, could happen here.
And I understand the position. I just, what I'm hearing you tell me is, if that is the case, to your alarm after the Supreme Court decision, a statutory change to that rule alone is not enough. You need more.
If you want to tell me I'm saving $50 by spending $2,000, I'm going to believe you. I just don't put value in the $50. I'd rather save more. I mean, our business owners need more.
Well, but again, but to your point, we don't really know if it's going to save anything, do we? I mean, we can't say that.
No, I'm using this metaphorically from the concept of a whole lot of ground was lost over the past few years through the erosion and through many court rulings, including Supreme Court.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the metaphor.
Yeah,
I
I didn't do good there. That's my fault.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you so much for the testimony tonight, and I would just, I really sincerely believe, I know that we are short on time. It's going to be crossover on Thursday, but I sincerely believe that this body can do better. And so I would motion to table the bill.
Okay. All right, have a motion and a second. I believe that takes precedent. We have to have a vote on it. Any further discussion on that? Representative Kelly.
I just asked the author's thoughts on that. I know we've had this case out since the middle of summer. I know he's been working diligently on this for going on probably 8 months now. There's times in the process where we need to move things forward, and there's times where we need to hit the pause button. To the author of the bill, how would you like us to move forward here?
I'd like to take a vote on the motion.
All right. All right, any further discussion on it?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I think that a lot of work has gone in. We're having committee discussion about this motion. Our job is to make law, and I think a lot of time has gone into this. People have looked at the cases and they said, that's not what we want, so we want to provide some certainty over here. We want to try to draw some lines. If we keep going with the questioning, my question to the current witness is, where would you draw the line? I asked that of another witness, and so far we're not getting alternatives. So, I mean, as any good lawyer knows, there's a million ways to kill a case. Winning a case is a lot harder. Building something is a lot harder. There's been a lot of work gone into building this, and so far, other than coming up here and throwing stones at it, I haven't heard anybody say, this is what I would do instead. this is what I think should be here. And so since we don't have that, I think if we table this bill, we're just abdicating our responsibility to protect both the citizens and the businesses of this state. And so I would encourage my fellow members to vote no on the motion.
Intention is not to table the bill, but if the representative wants to table the bill, then, and she's made the motion, and you're saying it takes precedent, let's have the motion heard, let's vote it, and let's continue to move forward.
Okay, well, I got a lot of flashing lights here, I guess, to discuss that, so I'm going to start with Representative Stoner.
No, I just, to my learned colleagues, because I'm not one of them, I understand. I mean, I've negotiated on lots of issues here. And yes, on a lot of issues I've worked on, we have put in a lot of work. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing. And yes, maybe we haven't gotten answers here that maybe some members want. But at this point, I do not see why, because of crossover day, that we need to do this. And there are other bills we can get. I've done that many times in my service here and everything. So I think there's, and I'm someone who wants something done, obviously. I mean, I've talked about my own personal experience and everything. But I'm hearing the business community. I'm not necessarily in the insurance community because, the old saying of saying insurance, the insurance companies always raise their rates and they give you different reasons. But I'm talking about the business community. I'm not talking about the insurance community. They're saying they don't want this bill to move. All right? So I'm not, with all due respect, and that's why that's what I'm hearing, and I'm a business person, and I think we need to go back, have more discussions. If we need to grab a bill, we'll see what happens in the Senate. So that's my reasons for why I think, as Representative Silcox has said, why we need to table this bill, and obviously we have not been successful at this point. That's not a reason to move the bill.
Chairman Smith. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've tried to stay pretty quiet during this and just listen and hear everybody out. I want to commend my friend from Waycross and his hard work on this. It seems as if at the 11th hour we negotiate, and then we ask for what the other position on this bill's proposition would be to fix it, and we have none. And that seems a little bit glib, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to be voting no on this motion to table for that very fact. I understand if we just disagree, we just disagree, and that's life.
All right. Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to add that I believe Mr. Edge said that he had 3 other versions that he would be willing to share and negotiate with the whip and in good faith, seriously.
Okay. Vice Chair.
I think some of the problem is some judges in a handful or so of counties are too apt to deny summary judgment and just send everything to trial. What I like about 1371 is it gives 3 pages of law that those trial judges and then the appellate courts would have readily accessible to apply the law to the facts and keep everything just from going to trial without any legal analysis. This gives some good law, good guidance for property owners, for insurance companies, and for the property owners to get the police engaged to take care of some of this risk and this problem that really the police should be handling better in some of those same counties where the judges are denying summary judgment and sending everything to trial with very little legal analysis. So that's my thought on it is I don't see any viable alternative to this at this late hour of this session. And when I came in, I had a lot of folks who said, let's do something this year.
Okay. Whip Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there have been several versions. Most recently, I just got a version today that we were waiting on all weekend. The first 2 versions, both of them said Senate Bill 186 on the bottom of them. So if you want to look at that version, just go look at Senate Bill 186 and you'll find it. That is where the starting point was, and it didn't move very much in the mitigation of the negotiations. There was very little to no movement. And so this is where we've ended up. And this is a culmination of a significant amount of negotiation and frankly, I think the gentleman here is right. We're just too far apart. We're far too far apart. What the group is advocating for is a wholesale change in how we settle these issues. Willful and wanton. I mean, you can read Senate Bill 186 if you want, but it's pretty much no liability. Zero liability. And while I have my friends from the insurance company in the room and my business community friends in the room, I represent 60,000 Georgians in South Georgia. All right, so I have to balance two interests here. I have to balance the interests of these businesses doing business, but I also have to balance the interest of folks that are actually aggrieved when you have a corporate malfeasance like you did in CVS, where the people are begging the company to do something, begging, please do something. The females that work for you are in danger every day, and they did nothing. This is corporate malfeasance, and we keep talking about what's foreseeable, but it is a reasonable person standard. What is reasonably foreseeable? If you got 4 gun crimes on the property and you remove your security guard, is that reasonably foreseeable? Is that reasonable to remove your security guard? I don't think so. The change is being asked to be made based on a large verdict in CVS and a large verdict in an apartment case where the apartment owner knew that the windows were malfunctioning. People were breaking in on a day-to-day basis, and instead of changing those locks, was it reasonably foreseeable if somebody was in the house that they would rape a woman in the house? That's what we're talking about here, folks. We're not talking about my friends back home who had a long conversation about this bill. We're not talking about somebody that sees there's a problem and says, hey, I want to protect the people that work for me. I want to protect the people that come to my business to do business. And so I'm going to do what I think is reasonable, and then does it. We're talking about somebody that just purely doesn't want to do anything. We've talked about, we proposed language that would give a weight to proximity of crime away from the premises, the actually owned property. But that was not something that the business community or the insurance community wanted to even consider. It has to be on your property. And I said, well, if you have a business and you have a crack house with gangs and guns and all kind of stuff going right next door to it, you think that it would be reasonable to put a fence up? Yeah, but it's not on my property. So if that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about your reasonable property owners, small business community back in Waycross who says, I want to put my lights out here. I'll hire a security guard. That's not what we're talking about. So while I appreciate the representative's motion, it is my intention to move the bill. This is a bill that we are trying to get passed. We've given 2 areas. That's where I stand, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate everybody's weighing in on this issue. This is a tough issue. I agree it's a tough issue. Wholesale change. What do we do when we do wholesale change? We have unintended consequences. So what's going to happen is this. We do it to a willful, wanton standard. One of your kids or one of your spouses is going to go on a property, and something's going to happen. And you're going to try to recover because somebody just totally turned a blind eye to what they knew was on property. And then you're going to be like, well, why can't I recover? This makes no sense. There's crimes on the property substantially similar to what just happened to my insert brother, sister, mother, child, and I can't recover. That's what I have to weigh out here, and that's what we're weighing. That's what the committee's weighing out. 2 interests here. Interest to do business, interest to protect Georgians.
All right, we have a motion. I think we've had enough discussion. All those in favor of tabling this bill, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. All right, we're still going. You had something to say.
Yeah, I'll finish with this. Please just remember this point in time. Remember the point in time where somebody who works with business owners and communities and cares about all of it came to you and said, this is bad legislation. Just remember it. It's on video. Thank you for your service.
All right. Representative Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
All right. I know we have a couple other witnesses left. You gentlemen want to?
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, if the committee has any questions this is Dan Snipes. I'm from Statesboro. I represent GTLA. I've got Mike Moran with me. He's actually the lawyer that represented Mr. Carmichael in the CBS case, and he's here to talk about the matter. But given the hour, we'll be glad to. We're here at the
Basically, y'all support the bill, right?
We do support the bill. We would like. I guess I would say, the bill is more than just a codification of the CVS v. Carmichael case. It does contain areas where it's clear that a claimant would not have a right to recovery if they're a bad actor, if they're a trespasser, if they're there to commit a crime that's a felony, or if they're there on the premises to commit a theft crime. It also, when you're looking in, and I think this gets lost because big picture, the types of cases we're talking about, in order for a business owner to be responsible for the criminal act of a third party, there's two things that have to occur. There has to be action that puts the business on notice that their guests are at a risk of harm from others. There has to be something that happens that puts them on notice. And what this bill says is just being in a high crime area is not enough. There has to be something else to put you on notice. The reason it's a reasonable person standard is that's what all of negligence law is based on. And there's nothing that's particularly more scary about saying totality of the circumstances, because that's weighing what is the greater weight of the evidence. Is the weight of the evidence such that it should put you on notice, or should it not put you on notice? And if things are further away, then that's not as likely to put you on notice as that things occur on your property or next door. But what we can't agree to from a reasonable person standard is that you draw bright lines and say, well, just because this happened across the street, you should never be on notice that people that visit your property could be harmed. You got to be reasonable. And then once you're on notice, you have to take reasonable steps. And why reasonable? Because in some locations, lights could be reasonable, and that's enough. In some locations, security cameras. In some locations, you may need security guards. But what this does is go beyond that and say, we're giving you certain times when you don't have to be on notice. And just being a high crime area is not enough. And if a claimant is there to do certain things, they can't recover. CVS v. Carmichael wasn't a lightning bolt. It was where the Supreme Court said the law in Georgia has always been you have a duty to people who come upon your property to do business, and you got a duty to take reasonable steps in light of foreseeable risk of harm. And all CVS v. Carmichael did was take existing Georgia case law and distill it down into one case. But it wasn't a fundamental shift in how these cases have been handled. Mr. Moran is an expert in the area, but I'm here to give you a big picture, and we'll be glad to give you as much more detail of why this is a compromise that moves the needle incrementally back towards the business community. That's what this statute does.
All right. I sense the committee is ready to do something, especially at this late hour, so if you gentlemen don't mind.
Yep.
And I'm sorry I'm not able to take all your testimony. There is also one other person, Laurel Hart. You wish to come up?
It sounds like a decision has already been made. I represented affordable housing, but I'm happy to waive it since it sounds like you.
It's just we're at the late hour. Vice Chair?
I've got House Bill 1371 in front of me. Does anybody have a substitute, an amendment, any alternative? Is this it on premises liability on February 27th, 2024 in the House? All right.
All right. All those in favor of passage of this bill?
Is there a second?
I thought I heard a second. Yeah, there's. All those in favor of passage of the bill say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
All right, the ayes have it. The bill goes to rules. All right, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a long night. We're adjourned.